Hey guys, how all of you beautiful people are doing? And yes, this is a new series, Accidental Gamer Hero. I accidentally saved the world and was granted 3 wishes when I died. Easy. First wish to reincarnate in the Naruto universe, and second is to reincarnate with the gamer ability. Third wish, I'll save it for later. /OC. So let's start without any delay. Hinata's palm strike was batted away with a ruthless efficiency epitomized by Hyuga Hayashi. The attempted attack was countered with Hayashi's own chakra-infused gentle fist that cracked against Hinata's jaw that sent her collapsing to the ground. The Hyuga patriarch stood over the still form of his daughter, his breath not even slightly labored, and his yukata still as pristine as before the training began. Better, but still lacking. He commented. You have engraved the forms of the gentle fist into your heart and have memorized every nuance of our clan's fighting style. But how you apply what you have learned is still lacking. Precision beats power and timing beats speed every time. If you just throw out your strikes according to the forms and without consideration for how your opponent can and will react to them, you will only demonstrate inflexibility and reveal the pattern in your attacks, inviting counterattacks. Now, get up. Hinata trembled on the ground before exerting what energy she still had left in her bruised body to pick herself back up. The steel in her gaze hardened as she moved into the opening stance of the gentle fist. Her father watched her and had to hold back the pride and praise he sincerely felt in his heart. Overt praise would only stroke his daughter's ego, but too little of it would also weaken her confidence. Watching who he had written off as being hopeless grow stronger, absorbing his lessons like a sponge does water, was humbling yet gratifying. It was little over 3 years ago when he first witnessed what his daughter was truly capable of when pushed to do so. What heartened him was not her admittedly deficient proficiency in the gentle fist, but the courage and decisiveness to use it in times of need. What was expected of the next Hyuga clan head was not just martial prowess, but the resolve to fight for their clan when it is required of them. Hinata never had the heart of a warrior. She was too meek, too timid to properly use what she had been taught in battle. It was a disappointment to see that his daughter had not inherited spirit of a fighter he himself possessed, rather it was her younger sister, Hanabi, that did. Hayashi loved both his daughters, and that was why he had written her off as hopeless in the first place. Because to inherit the authority over the Hyuga clan required strength, and the backbone to utilize that strength to beat down dissenters. One would be naive to think that all it took to inherit the mantle of the Hyuga clan head was just the right lineage and support from the previous head. The main family and the branch family, while seeming to coexist peacefully on the surface, had a deeply tense relationship in actuality. The branch family outnumbered the main 110 to 1, however, the main family is able to keep them under their thumbs due to the existence of the caged bird cursed seal. That, and the main family's monopoly of the Hyuga clan's secret techniques. Yet, despite having these tools that suppressed the branch family's hopes, desires and ambitions, none of them mattered if the head of the clan lacked the resolve to use it. It would take little imagination to think of what could happen if the branch family sensed weakness in the main family: assassination, rebellion, treason. After all, if there were no longer a main family to rule over the branch family, then they would be masterless servants. And as the leader of the clan and by extension the main family, the clan head's weakness represented the main family's weakness. It wasn't the sterling reputation of the Hyuga clan Hayashi cared about, it was the continuation of the clan's very existence that required a stern, iron fist to rule over both main and branch families. It was for both Hinata's sake, as well as the clan itself, that Hayashi first thought of condemning the girl to the branch house and letting her sister take over the leadership position. His first daughter would be able to live a more carefree existence, leading the branch family and guaranteeing the branch family's loyalty for another generation and supporting Hanabi, who would inherit the clan head position in her stead. This was an arrangement that would benefit all involved. It was an unexpected, yet welcome surprise when Hinata took the initiative and stepped up her training after that particular incident in her second year at the academy. It wasn't often Hayashi was taken by surprise. The insight provided by their clan's all-seeing eyes guaranteed so, and by his own daughter no less. His renewed pride in her, which subsequently reinforced her own confidence, led to a self-perpetuating cycle of improvement for the girl, wherein her confidence and skills skyrocketed after stagnating for so long. Even if she still lacked the killer instincts a powerful and famed shinobi needed to be successful, that could be slowly developed over her career. In the meantime, what Hayashi needed to do was to cultivate her will to wield the weapons she had been given. That is to say, the ability to hurt others when necessary. And to do so, he would beat the timidity out of her if need be. Hinata wordlessly launched another combo of gentle fist attacks, from pokes to palm strikes and the occasional kicks, to mix up what she had been told was a predictable offensive pattern. The Hyuga patriarch nodded in commendation. She was learning. As he parried or avoided her blows, he carried on his lessons verbally: to achieve your desires, to achieve your hopes, dreams, ambition, what do you need? The answer is strength. Only when you are strong enough to sneer and look down at the world, can you walk unimpeded to what you yearn for the most. If you encounter any obstacles, destroy them. When your enemies try to hold you back, destroy them. Speak, Hinata, what do you do when someone blocks your path? Hinata narrowed her eyes and gritted her teeth, going for a palm right at Hayashi's heart before twisting her body in a demonstration of her natural flexibility, and changed the trajectory of her strike at the last moment. As her palm approached Hayashi's liver instead, glowing in the telltale blue light of chakra that shined brightly under the chakra site of the Hyuga's Byakugan, she screamed, "Destroy them!" Excellent! Hayashi praised as he smacked away the palm that threatened to implode his organ, while simultaneously tripping the girl who had overextended trying to land an unexpected strike. In the single instant where Hinata was floating in midair, right after being swept off her feet by Hayashi, she could swear that she saw just the faintest shadow of a smile at the corner of her father's lips before, in a skillful display of Aikido, he flipped her and threw her to the ground with frightening ease. Once again, Hinata hit the hardwood floor of the Hyuga clan compound's main family dojo hard, the wind knocked out of her lungs, but all in all not injured beyond surface wounds. Twisting your body and changing where you were going to hit at the last minute was clever, but it is clear that you were unfamiliar with the move, and so your body was unable to keep up with what you had envisioned in your mind. Furthermore, it was painfully obvious what you were trying to do. I could see through your intentions just by reading where your eyes were looking at. Our eyes are pupil-less, but the iris can still betray your intentions. The Byakugan has a 360-degree vision. Make use of that so as to not divulge your target to your opponent by not physically looking at where you want to attack. You have a natural flexibility in your upper torso and lower limbs. Make use of that and continue developing your own style. Remember, the Hyuga clan's gentle fist is not the summit of Taijutsu. It is not the best fit for every one of its practitioners, and more often than not, the truly skilled members of the Hyuga clan develop their own styles by adjusting the gentle fist's forms. Hinata picked herself up, flinching slightly at the dull throbbing pain in her tired body, and bowed in gratitude for her father's lessons. I have listened well to your pointers, father. Thank you for your instruction. Hayashi stared wordlessly, appearing as though too proud to acknowledge his daughter's gratitude. I understand your team is planning to train together later, yes? Yes, father. She answered, though inwardly worried what her father had to say about it. The Aburam and Hyuga clan had at the very least, cordial relations, so he should approve of Shino. But Shinji, on the other hand, was an orphan. Even if he were the most talented person Hinata had ever encountered and possessed enough charisma in him to charm anyone he encountered, it was possible that Hayashi would look down on his background. Clean yourself up and go find Haruko to treat your wounds. There are certain standards you, as the heiress of the Hyuga clan, have to observe, after all. The Hyuga patriarch stated before turning to walk away, his posture as impeccable as always. To her surprise, he did not disparage her beloved Shinji-kun as she had expected. Rather, he even instructed her to pay attention to her appearance. Why yes, father. Hinata called out after her father. Staring at the stoic and imperturbable back of her father, she wondered just what was going through his mind. He was as hard to read as always, and it often took significant effort on her part just attempting to discern his thoughts. Could it be that father approves of Shinji-kun? Oh, that would be wonderful, he would bless our union and... Hinata reddened at the thought, before shaking her head clear of the image in her mind and went off to seek medical attention from the Hyuga clan head's personal physician. I ducked under a wild swing from Naruto before having to lean back to avoid a palm strike from Hinata. I grabbed the outstretched arm from the Hyuga heiress and threw the girl at Naruto, causing them both to stumble and fall in a heap. Snickering internally at the cliché shounen protagonist landing on his crush situation I had engineered, I turned to check out the other battle that was going on. Sasuke was exchanging blows with Shino while Shikamaru skirted around the edge of the exchange, occasionally sneaking in a kick or two to disrupt Sasuke's tempo. The Uchiha performed admirably against the Aburam, deflecting the attempted strikes without much difficulty and landing a couple of his own to boot. Team 7 and Team 10 was currently participating in one of the regular inter-team training sessions I had organized. We regularly sparred against one another or exchanged training tips to help each other grow, albeit I was the one who was usually imparting what I knew rather than the other way round. It had been some time since both teams passed their respective Jounin tests. Team 10 started on D-ranked missions as well as receiving training from Asuma. I had to hold myself back from cringing when I thought back about the day Asuma had pulled me aside to show me nature transformation. The Jounin had pulled out a pair of chakra induction paper that could determine an individual's chakra affinity when their chakra was channeled into them. He explained the whole concept of chakra affinities and nature transformation while I listened attentively. Even though I already knew everything he was talking about, it was possible that there were certain subtle nuances that I lacked knowledge of. Unsurprisingly, the paper had split in two and both halves ignited in flames upon receiving my chakra. Asuma was extremely excited upon learning of the fact. He first conceded that it was exceedingly rare for any person to have more than one elemental affinity. The fact that I had both wind and fire affinities, traditionally conflicting elements, likely suggested that I had shinobi parentage. I expressed my shock and for a moment I wondered whether it was the brightest idea to display my affinities if it would open up inquiries about my background. But ultimately I concluded that it wasn't the worst thing in the world for people to begin speculating about my parentage, since I would eventually have to reveal my Uchiha lineage sometime in the future. It was an inevitable, sooner or later type situation. Furthermore, only by revealing my chakra affinities could I receive proper instruction from Asuma, the effects of which would be greatly boosted by my title, Asuma's disciple. The Jounin then boasted that he too possessed a natural wind affinity, which was rare for inhabitants of the land of fire, while having mastered both wind and fire nature transformation. The man took on a rare contemplative look before subsequently offering to teach me everything he knew about nature transformation and their related abilities. He held such sincerity and eagerness in his eyes that I could hardly reject, not that I would have in the first place. Having an experienced, elite Jounin like Asuma guiding the development of my shinobi skills would be immensely rewarding. I guessed that the Jounin was greatly enthused about having a talented disciple at the prime of the man's shinobi career to cultivate and impart his hard-earned skills. After I accepted his offer of a mentorship, he started me out on the wind element nature transformation exercise, which involved molding wind nature chakra and infusing it into a leaf. Being able to split the leaf in two directly down the middle with no additional cuts indicated the first step towards success, as Asuma had demonstrated. Initially I was dubious about the effectiveness of such a training method to improve my control of wind nature chakra given my natural wind affinity perk. Turns out, I was wrong. My hubris and confidence in the system prevented me from actively testing whether my theory had been right. Just after a few attempts in trying to ignite the leaf, I received a new system notification. Through repeated actions, you have created a new skill. Wind nature transformation has been added to your skill page. Through advanced chakra manipulation exercise, you have gained +1 int. Wind nature transformation, passive, LVL, 1. Increased efficiency in handling wind nature chakra. +15% damage dealt with all wind-related skills. -3% CP cost to all wind-related skills. Asuma didn't only work on nature transformation with me, he also began honing my taijutsu and kenjutsu skills. Although the Jounin did not wield a blade as his primary weapon, he had plenty of experience dealing with enemies who did, thus he could correct my kenjutsu forms and help me integrate the theory into practical combat application. Of course, the man didn't only focus on myself. He also trained Shino and Hinata as well, though Asuma had admitted that because of their reliance on their exclusive clan techniques, he could hardly teach anything at the advanced level without requiring the two clan genins to compromise the time they spent on their clan techniques. However, the Jounin could still firm up their foundational skills as well as coach them on more advanced chakra control exercises along with practical combat techniques. There was also a focus on teamwork exercises and a more theoretical exploration on how the three of us could synergize our respective skill sets. From the get-go, Asuma established the fundamental roles each of us took on in the team. Both Hinata and Shino functioned primarily as the team's tracking and capture specialists. Do not underestimate the common shinobi's reliance on chakra, Asuma espoused. Most shinobi had such a deeply ingrained dependence on the miracles of chakra that once one could deprive them access to that chakra, be it through the gentle fist of the Hyuga clan or chakra absorption trays of the Aburam's Kikaichua, they would have nearly nothing else to fall back on, making them an easy target to subdue once they were denied access from their chakra. Of course, he also warned them to never be complacent even if the target could not use their chakra. There existed many esoteric and unorthodox shinobi who possessed alternative methods to take a life. As for myself, I was the obvious heavy hitter in the trio. A combination of deadly close-range capabilities with my kenjutsu and taijutsu as well as mid to long-range versatility in my ninjutsu made me an all-round competent heavy assault combatant. Added to that my undisclosed Sharingan that came with it an arsenal of eye-based genjutsu alongside my proficiency in medical ninjutsu meant that unless I was exceedingly outclassed, I would be a match for any opponent. It was with this team composition that Asuma adjusted our training regime. He was helping Hinata with the issue of closing the distance to land her gentle fist strikes or figuring out a way to circumvent the need for getting up close and personal with the enemy. With Shino he provided some strategies to utilize his Kikaichua in more creative ways that would not risk the lives of his nest. And finally with me, he emphasized combatability and developed me as the trio's protector cum attack dog, able to go on the defensive to act as a shield for my teammates as easily as striking out offensively against our enemies. It was a role not often prescribed to normal teams as it required for the individual to take on far too many responsibilities for one to perform effectively. However, Asuma deemed me as being competent enough to take on these duties and flexible enough to engage both offensively and forward/or defensively at will. It was a flattering assessment, though I did somewhat worry if Asuma was evaluating me with an over-exaggeration of my abilities. There was a certain modicum of pressure that started to seep in as the man highlighted the importance of my role in the team as well as the confidence he had that I could perform said role with ease. I wouldn't say that I thrived under pressure, but at the same time, I did enjoy a challenge. Additionally, a day after our graduation exams, Sasuke told me about the test Kakashi had given them, before expressing an interest to learn Naruto's shadow clone technique. I had realized then and there that it was the perfect opportunity to accomplish a couple of my goals, namely, training Naruto, developing his and Sasuke's bond, and to openly learn the shadow clone. Thus, I gave Sasuke my suggestion, and though he was slightly reluctant in the beginning, the trust and confidence he had in me ultimately won over his initial hesitance. We then approached Naruto and offered to train him in exchange for him teaching us his Kichibunshin technique. I even dangled ninjutsu as a metaphorical carrot to sweeten the deal. Naruto was initially hesitant, since he had been warned by the Hokage not to teach the technique to just anyone willy-nilly, and that it was a dangerous technique for anyone who used it recklessly. However, I managed to convince him that the shadow clone technique wasn't dangerous on its own, it was only the mass version of the technique that would be dangerous in the hands of someone who lacked the chakra reserves the blonde did. Once again, my oratory and persuasive skills were a sight, or rather a sound, to behold, and he conceded. Though I had to also assume that what should be my massive rep score with the boy as well as my relatively high char stat had to have played a part as well. As a result, Naruto agreed to teach Sasuke and I his Kichibunshin jutsu, and in return we would train him. Using the exchange of techniques as an excuse, I then extended the invitation to train together to the rest of our teams, and subsequently established regular inter-team training sessions for all of us to train together. Being able to openly use the Kichibunshin without receiving suspicion on where I had picked it up from would greatly expand the versatility of my skillset. After some experimentation in privacy, I had found out a few key features the technique introduced upon coming into contact with my gamer system. First off, shadow clones were not able to access the game system, period. At least, not like I could. The inventory and status pages could not be called up by a clone, so there would be no such thing like pulling out thousands of explosion tags from the inventory for a kamikaze suicide bombing by a clone, nor could a clone pump in all the free stat points accumulated for a temporary boost in strength. The exception to that was the doppelganger from when I used summon doppelganger. Although the doppelganger could not use the free stat points in my status page, it had access to the inventory. Something that would definitely come in handy in the future. Additionally, I retained the memories of the doppelganger when it disappeared, similar to how shadow clones functioned. Secondly, quests completed by clones netted me the same amount of EXP or other rewards as if I was the one who completed it. Which meant that theoretically if I had 1,000 clones running around completing simple quests that rewarded even merely 10 EXP per piece, it would be an insane rate of return. Not that I could even create 1,000 clones nor generate 1,000 quests in the first place, but it was good to know that it was a possibility if I did. Right now, with my max CP of 7,535, I could comfortably make 10 shadow clones, which also meant multiplying my skill growth rate by 1000%. I could make maybe 1 or 2 more, but reducing my CP further would greatly hamper their individual effectiveness. This is because of the shadow clone's weakness. The one weakness being that each clone would only possess a max CP of 753, the system rounded down it seemed, and they could not naturally regenerate CP like I could. Meaning, they were stuck with the amount of CP distributed when I created the clones originally. However, I had also discovered that the clones could recover CP when they meditated, so there was one silver lining at least. This made it so that the clones could theoretically operate indefinitely if it continuously meditated to recover CP, although its efficiency would be lackluster to say the least. Regardless, my skill growth rate rocketed upwards tremendously despite the disadvantages. Not only skills, even my stats could increase with the help of the shadow clones. Int wasn't a physical stat that relied on physical exertion and conditioning to improve. It was all about mental exercises or acquiring new knowledge, not to mention the int stat gains when I practiced nature transformation. The shadow clones were more than capable of reading new books or exercising their brain power through puzzles or games like Shogi and Go, as well as practicing nature transformation. The experiences of which would be received by the original me when they were dismissed. As a result, my int stat once more soared past my other physical stats. The training sessions usually went as such: a focused one-on-one mentoring with Naruto, a taijutsu spar involving either Sasuke or I fighting in a 1v2 against 2 others, or Sasuke and I teaming up to fight 2v4. Sometimes, if I felt cocky enough, I would take on 3 or even 4 of them at the same time. These taijutsu spars were mainly meant for Sasuke to hone his edge against multiple opponents concurrently, and for our teammates to gain experience working together with others. As for me, well, I rarely benefited from these sessions. I didn't mind, however, as making sure Sasuke and Naruto became stronger would ultimately be beneficial in the bigger picture. Damn it, stop throwing Hinata at me, Shinji. Naruto angrily exclaimed as he picked himself up while gingerly helping Hinata up as well. I shook my head in a faux condescension. TSK, TSK. If you complained less, then I wouldn't have to throw Hinata at you so often. The girl in question didn't look as affected as I thought she would be, only casually separating herself from Naruto without any sputtering or crimson flushes. The blonde growled, "That does it. Kichibunshin no Jutsu." 2 clones materialized next to him, both in combat-ready stances. Sighing, a surge of chakra coursed through my chakra pathways and exited the soles of my feet as I used Flash Step to instantly cross the distance between us. For the last time, no ninjutsu during a taijutsu spar, Naruto. A fist and a kick flashed out and destroyed the clones before I moved forward to catch Naruto in a headlock. Your punishment for breaking the rules: 10 seconds noogie. I declared and grinded my knuckle against the top of his head. Ugh. I give. Naruto yelped in pain as he struggled to get out of the headlock. I refused to relent and only released the boy after the 10 seconds were up. The blonde fell back, rubbing the top of his head, pouting. No fair, I can't beat you with just taijutsu alone. That's why you need to practice and improve your taijutsu so that one day you can beat me with just taijutsu. I snapped back immediately, slightly tired of his attitude. This wasn't the first time we had such a conversation, and knowing the boy, it wasn't going to be the last. Damn it, why can't my shadow clones learn taijutsu as well? He whined. I rolled my eyes at his question. A question that had already been answered multiple times. I already told you, your shadow clones, while extremely useful in learning theory, can't help you with the practical application of your taijutsu knowledge. You have to develop muscle memory, instinct, reflexes and hone your combat sense, and there is only one way to do all that. I know. Getting my butt kicked. Repeatedly. Naruto sullenly replied. That's right. Imagine every single one of your clones being a taijutsu master, being able to avoid attacks and land their own at the same time. The effectiveness of your clones would amplify exponentially. The blonde grumbled, but ultimately accepted my words. All right, enough taijutsu for today, they should be about done too. I looked over at the other fight that was similarly wrapping up, with Sasuke slipping into his opponent's guard while delivering a finishing and crushing right hook that landed with deadly accuracy on Shino's side where his liver was. The impact of the blow coupled sent the Aburam collapsing to the ground, groaning in pain. Shikamaru, on the other hand, was already on his back. Whether he was too exhausted to move or just couldn't bother doing so, I couldn't tell. Sasuke formed a fist and placed it square on the fallen Aburam's temple. Yield. Shino silently nodded and the Uchiha withdrew his fist before extending a hand to help the other genin up. It was heartwarming to see such a courteous conduct from the boy, a far cry from how I remembered him prior to my interference. I beckoned Naruto and Hinata to follow me and went over to the others, momentarily stopping by Shikamaru to nudge with my foot. Get up, lazy bones, up next is the 3v3 team fight. The Nara glanced at me and breathed out, remind me why I'm doing this again. It's either this or a 1v1 spar between us. Totally your choice. I menacingly smiled. Shikamaru unhurriedly got up, choosing between a knife or an ever bigger knife is no choice at all. It all depends on your perspective, Shika-chan. A small knife in your eye is way worse than a big knife in your thigh. The lazy genius gave me a strange look. Yeah. I have 3 questions. 1. Have you ever killed a person before? 2. How many people have you killed? And 3. Please will you not kill me? I laughed and patted his shoulder, to which he flinched at. Oh, so funny, Shika-chan. Now come on, let's get started. As I turned to the rest, I heard him muttering behind me, you didn't answer my question. Right, moving on. I clapped my hands to get their attention. We are now going to start the 3v3 team fight. As usual, it will be Team 7 versus Team 10. No restrictions except anything that would leave a permanent injury or something my medical ninjutsu can't fix. I'm looking at you, Sasuke. Oh, don't give me that look. Last week you were about to send a great fireball at my team if I hadn't stopped you. The Uchiha tsk'd but relented. And as always, the losing team has to pay for the losing team's dinner. Without further ado, take your positions. My team and I moved to one end of the training ground while Team 7 went to the other before huddling together, with Shikamaru looking like he was giving instructions to the other 2. This wasn't our first team battle, and both Naruto and Sasuke realized a while back that listening to Shikamaru would more often than not leave them in a much better position. The Nara could be described as the glue that held Team 7 together. Not spiritually, but tactically. Both Naruto and Sasuke possessed stubborn personalities that clashed often. At times they insisted on doing things their way and usually would pay the price for doing so. Shikamaru provided a voice of reason, and his prodigious flair for strategy and keen insight had more than once caught my team and I by surprise. Not that they would have been successful had I been taking the fights seriously. More often than not I took a back seat to these exchanges, allowing either Hinata or Shino to take the lead. These team exercises were more for the others' benefit than my own. Underneath my forehead protector I secretly wore the Berserker's eye patch to even the playing field between both teams. Its effects kicked in even if it was not worn over my eye. Not only that, but I also limited the skills I could use, namely, chakra enhancement, chakra flow, flash step, and naturally, Sharingan. Even with Sasuke's own Sharingan activated, however, we were still roughly on the same level. Because even though my stats were reduced by half, the amount of passive bonuses my skills granted me boosted my abilities a fair bit. Team 10 similarly huddled together as Hinata shared her plan. So Shinji-kun will take go-ahead and take on Sasuke. Naruto will likely be using his shadow clone technique then, so I would have to trouble Shino-kun to use your Kikaichua to disperse then. We have seen before that even a single bite will pop the clones, so spread out your hive and take them out all at once. I will move in to dispatch the real Naruto, but I will have to leave Shikamaru to Shinji-kun once he is done with Sasuke. His shadow jutsu always gets me before I can close the distance, but Shinji-kun is too fast for his shadow to keep up. And Shino-kun, keep an eye out on Shikamaru using your hive's shadow to extend his range. It caught you last time even though you spread out your hive pretty far apart. That should be all, right? Shino lifted his head. I don't think that we should. I cut him off with a hand on his shoulder. Today is Hinata's turn to come up with the strategy. I gently but firmly reminded him with an assertive look in my eye. Part of wargaming, or strategic planning, was the luxury to make mistakes in the safety of a controlled environment today. Mistakes weren't failures, as I had shared with them once, mistakes were opportunities to learn and grow. Depriving another of that opportunity was tantamount to sabotaging their chance to learn from those mistakes and improve. Neither Hinata nor I had interrupted with any unnecessary comments or critiques when he was the one planning, so at the very least he should extend the same courtesy when it was someone else. I wanted Shino and Hinata both to develop their own sense of tactics and strategies, rather than relying on any one person for instructions. It was useful in improving not just large-scale strategic planning, but also smaller-scale, moment-to-moment tactics during a fight. It would also allow them to think for themselves and in the future question whether an order given by a superior would make the most tactical sense. Shino's next words were caught in his throat at my message as he gave a slight bow. I understand. My apologies, Hinata-san. Hinata reddened at the interaction, seeming to be flustered at what might be perceived as conflict between teammates for one less informed of the team's dynamics. It's okay, Shino-kun. I didn't really mind, but thank you, Shinji-kun. Why you're always so kind. I mean, are we ready? Both Shino and I nodded, already used to the girls' more eccentric idiosyncrasies. We turned to our opponents, who looked to have finished their planning at the same time as us. Ready? I shouted across the field. Hell yeah! When we win, we're going to Ishiraku's, Datbao. I'm going to get 5, no 6 bowls of their premium Kurobuta tonkotsu. A certain member of Team 7 yelled in response, while his raven-haired teammate rolled his eyes before they shifted from onyx black to a familiar crimson red. I wish I had someone other than Sajuk to whom I could comment on the irony of said Uchiha using his Sharingan for a spar against me when just few months back it was the other way round. Shino's Kikaichua buzzed angrily as I sensed a large number of them already beginning to tunnel into the dirt beneath him. The veins on the sides of Hinata's eyes bulged as a whispered Bakugan activated the Hyuga clan's dojutsu. Unlike when she was still in the academy where she needed hand seals to circulate the chakra to activate her Bakugan, it seemed that she was familiar enough with the process now that not even a single hand seal was needed. I smiled slightly at my teammates' preparation and eagerness to start the fight before drawing my wakizashi to accompany their battle-ready stance. Begin. 45 meters, 11 o'clock. Hinata reported through the eyes of her all-seeing Bakugan. I nodded in response, roger that. Shino, surround the target and drive her towards us. Understood. The stoic Aburam replied as he sent wave after wave of Kikaichua into the surrounding vegetation. Chakra surged into my body as I activated chakra enhancement. There was no room for error. I closed my eyes and counted down mentally. It would take roughly 10 seconds for Shino's swarm to position themselves, so I had another 5, 4, 3, 2. I reopened my eyes and dashed forward, activating whirlwind steps to further boost my already impressive speed. My eyes, even without the Sharingan, instantly took note of all the footholds and branches along my path as I made my way towards the target. Thanks to my relatively high DEX stat which improved my dynamic visual acuity naturally, I had keen eyesight regardless whether or not my Daojutsu was activated. It was a feat in and of itself going as fast as I was while making as little sound as possible. Had I been wearing the rogue's item set, my footsteps would have been soundless. But I figured it was kind of weird for a genin to possess soundless footsteps even as he walked around normally, so I held off on wearing them unless I was on a mission that required discretion. It took but a few moments before I reached my target, Tora the cat. The feline menace had extraordinarily keen senses, even for a cat, and had sensed my presence just before I could snatch up the animal with my outstretched hand despite my stealthy approach. With a snarl, the cat leapt away with the unnatural grace and dexterity afforded to its species only to realize that its escape path had already been blocked off by swarms of insects. Its eyes flickered around, trying to find a hole in the web we had spun around it. A gap in the blockade of Kikaichua drew its attention as it immediately dashed through. Of course, that gap was intentionally left open to begin with. Just as Tora was about to achieve freedom, I reappeared with flash step right in front of the creature and rope flew out of my hands. Hohajutsu, or restraining rope technique, was a standard skill all shinobi had to learn. In the hands of an expert, however, it could bind the enemy in rope before they even realized what was happening. In a flash, the cat was now bound in rope even as it was trying its hardest to get out of it with its little body. While cats had an extremely flexible and skinny physique which was disguised by their fluffy coat, a shinobi's Hohajutsu ensured not even a creature such as Tora could escape from its restraints. Target acquired. Team 7 reporting in. Target, dubbed Tora the cat, has been acquired. Mission accomplished. Asuma stiffly announced while the rest of us stood at attention behind him. Under his arm was the creature in question, though it was now free from its restraints. Asuma had removed the rope before we entered the Hokage's tower, citing that the mission requester would not be happy to see her beloved pet being bound tightly in rope. What he used to pacify the restless creature instead was a focused, directed flare of his chakra that sent every survival instinct in the cat's brains firing on all cylinders. Tora instinctively realized that the human that was holding her was akin to an apex predator that currently had its claws poised around the cat's neck. One wrong move and the feline's throat would be torn out. Or at least, I assumed that the cat was thinking as it immediately shrank into docility upon receiving the targeted chakra spike from Asuma. Had my Sharingan been activated then, I might have even created a new skill. Something like, killing intent, or similar. The Hokage who was seated in the mission dispatch desk nodded calmly, though he looked slightly stirred. Removing the tobacco pipe from his lips, he spoke to us as he looked directly past Asuma. Capturing Tora in under an hour is considered by many to be an unofficial trial by fire for freshly minted genin. Very well done, Team 10. Thank you Hokage-sama. The three of us chorused. Quest, mission, D-capture, completed. Retrieve Tora the cat, square root. Bonus, complete mission within 3 hours, square root. Bonus, complete mission within 1 hour, square root. Hidden, persuade Tora to willingly follow you back, X. Rewards happy smiley. Plus 500 EXP. Bonus, plus 100 EXP. Bonus, plus 1 point. Hidden, new title, Cat Whisperer, X. I loved D-ranked missions. Every mission assigned by the Hokage's Tower generated a quest, and these quests all had their own rewards separate from the actual mission payment we would receive from the village administration. They provided ample EXP for relatively simple tasks that could be completed in a short time. If only my shadow clones could receive these missions themselves, I would be able to accumulate EXP at a ridiculous rate. However, my request to do so had been rejected by Asuma. The Jounin, upon learning that I had picked up the Kichibunshin from Naruto, was initially concerned that I might misuse the technique and end up harming myself. But ultimately he knew me well enough to know that I wasn't a fool who would recklessly make more clones than I could handle. Although he trusted that I was competent enough to use the jutsu sparingly, using the clones to complete D-ranked missions was another matter entirely. He explained that the missions were used by the village to instill patriotism and empathy for the village and its people. That was why Konoha spent a large amount annually subsidizing the costs for these missions. They were not something to be used by shinobi to exploit for profit, nor were they intended to be so. These D-ranked missions had to be taken as a team and completed as a team in order to maximize the propaganda effects. Therefore, regrettably, I was not able to use shadow clones to take on D-ranked missions to farm EXP. Other system-generated quests were perfectly fine though, if they weren't assigned by the village, that is. At that moment, the door to the side opened up and in walked a corpulent woman dressed in what had to be the finest and most luxurious garment money could buy. Her rotund cheeks was heavily caked in ghastly makeup, while the woman was also adorned with various forms of jewelry and ornaments made of gold and precious gems. Right behind her was a stoic-looking man dressed in an ornate yukata, though less extravagant than the woman's. He had the distinctive aura of a sheathed blade, and his eyes flickered about, seemingly looking for hidden threats. For a moment, his pupils locked towards the corner of the room, as though he was staring at someone who no one else could see, before relaxing his vigilance and following the woman into the room. Hiruzen, I heard that my Tora-chan has been Tora-chan. You're back. The woman started before yelling in joy and running over to Asuma and snatching the cat from his arms and into hers. Oh, my poor little Tora-chan. Mommy was so worried about her naughty little fuzzykins. Yes, she was. The lady exclaimed as she clutched the cat in what I had to assume to be a bone-crushing hug, even for the flexible cat. Tora shrieked in displeasure while struggling to get out of the grasp of the lady, though with little success. I cocked an eyebrow in curiosity, thinking about the audacity of the woman who had dared address the Sundame Hokage so casually and with so little regard to his authority. Before I remembered who the owner of Tora the cat belonged to the fire daimyo's wife. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Asuma lean forward, as if he had almost instinctively knelt down in deference, a habit I was sure he picked up during his days at the capital as one of the 12 guardian shinobi, but he caught himself before he did. Kneeling to someone right in front of your own Hokage was a sign of such disrespect that even Asuma, the Sundame's own son, was not willing to display. Instead, the Jounin bowed deeply. "Lady Shijimi, it is an honor to meet you once again." The woman raised her head from cuddling the cat and took a look at the man who had just spoken. "You are, oh, Asuma. Come now, no need for such formality. Raise your head, you are no longer in the service of my husband. How long has it been since you left the capital?" "A year." Asuma straightened his back and smiled. "Slightly longer than a year, Lady Shijimi. You look as radiant as ever." "Ho ho ho, you're as smooth talking as ever too, Asuma. I heard you became a Jounin instructor recently. Is this your genin team?" Lady Shijimi gestured at the three of us who had been watching the exchange with some astonishment before being startled by the sudden attention. "Yes, Lady Shijimi." Asuma looked to have been considering something in his head before he continued. "They are a talented bunch who will serve the land of fire well in the future. Although truth be told, I still deeply yearn for the days spent in service to his lordship Daimyo-sama." His words were just empty platitudes. That I knew for a fact. Asuma had repeatedly shared with us that there were as many downsides to being one of the 12 guardian shinobi as there were benefits. Though it seemed the daimyo's wife appreciated the gesture. She approached us as we bowed deeply, similar to how Asuma had been just bowed before. At ease, she motioned for us to rise. Lady Shijimi stared at Hinata for a moment before giving an aha look. "Oh, I know you. You're Hayashi's daughter, yes." Hinata was unexpectedly not as flustered as I thought she would have been, apparently having been taught by her father on the ways to interact with figures of nobility. "Yes, Lady Shijimi." It seemed that she had also been taught to be concise and precise with her words when dealing with such people. "Ah, I remember your mother. What a shame that was. So young." The Hyuga looked to have been caught off guard by the statement. I didn't think she had been aware that the fire daimyo's wife was so familiar with her parents. I thank you for your kind words, Lady Shijimi." The woman nodded before turning to Shino and me, though seeming to not have received an impression that would have prompted her to converse with us lowly genins. Without speaking, she turned away from us and approached Asuma once more, who I now realized was speaking to the man who had been following Lady Shijimi. "It has been a while, Sarutabi." The man greeted, his aura presence tinged with a sharp edge that was not present before. "Likewise, Sakamoto." Asuma returned the greeting, though his head was tilted in a superior manner. I could only guess at the history behind the two warriors. Out of curiosity, I casted observe on the mysterious man. Sakamoto Takeshi LV. HP. CP. Sakamoto Takeshi is the bodyguard of Lady Shijimi. You can't tell what he thinks of you. Takeshi is stronger than you. It was not surprising that I could not read the status of the man, which could only mean that he was more than 50 levels higher than me. My Jounin instructor had a similar status page when I used observe on the man, albeit with slightly more information than the sparse description of this individual. He and Asuma felt equally dangerous to the side of my mind that had a habit of assessing any potential danger to me. HMPH, we still haven't settled our dispute, before you ran away back to Konoha. Takeshi taunted. Asuma lifted an eyebrow before smirking. If by dispute you mean you challenging me to a fight and then losing before swearing you will win the next time, then sure. I ran away. The bodyguard narrowed his eyes and was about to retort before Lady Shijimi interrupted their exchange of verbal barbs. Let's go, Takeshi. Hiruzen, double the payment for Asuma's team. They have done well. Yes, mistress. Takeshi acknowledged, not before sending a parting glare at Asuma. Of course, Lady Shijimi. The Hokage responded, please, allow me to escort you. Hiruzen stood up and accompanied the fire daimyo's wife and her bodyguard out of the room while signaling to us that we were dismissed. The three genins including me exchanged looks and simultaneously breathed out a sigh of relief. Even Shino, the ever-stolid Aburam, could not remain unaffected in the presence of one of the most powerful person in terms of authority in the Land of Fire. Asuma continued staring at the door where his father and the wife of his previous employer had just left through. Feelings of nostalgia and longing seemed to have burgeoned out of the Jounin's heart where it had been previously buried deep. Asuma-sensei, I started, pulling the man out his thoughts. I don't understand, why does the daimyo's wife even need genins to retrieve her cat for her? I am sure she has her own entourage who are more than capable of doing so. And I hear that she is in Konoha often and loses her cat just as often. The whole thing just seems strange to me. Yes, I too am curious. That man looked to be an accomplished warrior. Surely he would have the ability to retrieve a meerkat. Shino added. Hinata looked to still have been affected by Lady Shijimi's parting words, so she remained silent and out of the conversation. Asuma brushed his beard. That's complicated. Shino, Hinata, the two of you will become the heads of your respective clans in the future, so perhaps it would be good for you to hear this. And I think the three of you are mature enough not to go around spreading rumors or leaking what I am about to say. He motioned for us to come closer as he whispered. The situation in the capital is turbulent. The daimyo has one official wife, and that is Lady Shijimi. But he also has quite a few concubines, among whom 3 of them have sired children for him. And it is these 3 who often compete, rather viciously too, for the daimyo's time and affections. As the daimyo's legal wife, Lady Shijimi has little reason to bother with the infighting amongst the concubines. However, there is no wife in the world who can stand to see her husband making googly eyes at other women. Furthermore, because of the favor the daimyo has bestowed to the 3 concubines, they are allowed more leeway in their machinations, which at times would involve Lady Shijimi. My theory is that such an environment can be too toxic for Lady Shijimi, who can't stand the daimyo's behavior. Not that I would blame her, not only is her husband spending every night with young women, but he also turns a blind eye to their schemes. So she often makes trips to Konoha, giving excuses like maintaining the relationship between our village and the daimyo's court, in order for her to spend less time in the capital city and avoid being part of the infighting between the daimyo's women. Tora often escapes for her to have a reason to remain in Konoha even longer than she needs to. Sending a bodyguard to retrieve the cat would be too quick for her purposes, while allowing Genin to do so would not only stretch out the time she gets to spend in Konoha, but she can also further justify it by claiming to be participating in the village's system of D-ranked missions inculcating loyalty. Not to mention she also gets to avoid the messed up conflict between the daimyo's children, but that's a story for another time, and a much too sensitive topic to be discussed so openly. Asuma finished elaborating. I titled my head in interest. I never knew that behind the scenes of Lady Shijumi's visits to Konoha lay such a tumultuous backstory. Neither did I know that the daimyo had concubines or even multiple children to boot. Asuma mentioned some kind of conflict between them as well, perhaps a fight for the throne. Fascinating. All right, story time's over. The three of you have the rest of the day off, you can leave now. The old man wants to talk after this, so I will stay. Hi, Asuma-sensei. You have been requested for a mission. The Hokage started before sliding a scroll across the desk towards the standing Asuma. The Jounin furrowed his brows in surprise and some discontent at the statement. Was his father expecting him to leave his team in the village while he went off to participate in a mission? Did he truly think that lowly of him? No, calm down, listen to what the old man has to say first. I am afraid I won't be able to take up any individual missions while my squad is still undergoing training. Asuma replied respectfully, though with a slight edge to his voice. As if expecting such a response, Hiruzen continued unimpeded, you misunderstand me. It is you and your team that have been requested. Asuma tilted his head in confusion, my team? How is that possible? They have barely graduated from the academy, who could be the one requesting them? It couldn't be Lady Shijumi, could it? The Hokage chuckled, no, of course it is not Lady Shijumi. The mission requester claims he is an old friend of yours, a merchant based in the capital city. One Kurokawa Yoshio. The Jounin gained a look of understanding, ah yes, he is indeed an acquaintance I had made while I was in the capital. He's here in Konoha now. The Sundame nodded, indeed. He has requested you, and by extension your team, to escort him back to the capital city. For old time's sake, he claims. A simple C-ranked escort mission, it shouldn't take longer than 2 weeks traveling back and forth. Of course, that is only if you judge your team to be ready for a C-ranked mission, are they? Asuma donned a contemplative look. It had only been a month since his team graduated from the academy, and for any other greenhorn, wet behind the year genin team, it would have been a resolute no. But if he was being completely objective, there was only a little difference between Team 10 and other veteran genin squads. Their individual skills were solid, without a single weak link between them. All three could hold their own against a threat not surpassing Chuunin level, aside from his pride and joy Shinji, who could probably fend off even Chuunin level opponents for a period of time. Their teamwork was also commendable given the short time they have been working together. He tacitly approved of the inter-team training sessions his protege had been organizing with Team 7 since it not only sharpened their teamwork, but those sessions also honed their combat instincts. Sometimes he would drop by and watch them from a distance, impressed with the maturity and foresight Shinji displayed in organizing and during these sessions. Asuma knew that Shinji held himself back during the inter-team spars, and for a young, rookie genin with a chip on his shoulder and looking for something to prove, holding back showed incredible restraint and self-control. Already, the Rookie of the Year was proving himself to be a one-in-a-generation talent that would one day find himself amongst the ranks of other monstrous geniuses. At times, the Jounin even felt apprehensive teaching the boy. Shinji had an unbelievable ability to comprehend his teachings. No one would believe that the kid, using just a couple shadow clones to amplify his training, picked up nature transformation in just a few days as though he was picking up tree walking. His combat instincts and physical capabilities were being sharpened so quickly Asuma could often see the changes with his own eyes. Yet, at the same time, there was also a certain amount of pride that came with being the sensei of a prodigy. Just as his father could boast that he was the mentor of the legendary Sannin, so too could Asuma boast that he was the mentor of the legendary figure Shinji were sure to become in the future. Such a thought also gave Asuma some pressure, since a grave mistake on his part could ruin the boy's future, but the man could only worry about that when the time came. Other than Shinage, both Hinata and Shino were also shaping up to be competent shinobi in their own right. Asuma could tell that Shino had been galvanized by Shinji's overwhelming talent. Although the Abiram never outwardly expressed such a sentiment, Asuma could recognize that feeling of inferiority and subsequent ambition to overcome the complex. It was a feeling all too familiar for the man. As such, Shino gave 120% during every training session, and from what he heard, even back at his clan compound his efforts did not diminish. In fact, his diligence further intensified when he was training his clan's techniques. His progress could not be compared to Shinji's own freakishly fast development, but he was certainly heads above the rest of the graduating class. Similarly, Hinata also displayed the expected Hyuga excellence. Though her personality outside of battle was something that should be worked on, during combat however, her attacks could get downright vicious. The gentle fist was a deadly taijutsu style, and in the hands of someone who knew how lethal it was and could use it to a frightening degree of proficiency, it was a devastating martial art that would render an unsuspecting opponent suffering from their negligence. She seemed to have been working on slowly altering the usual gentle fist style to suit her own personal fighting style and physique, modifying the usually hard and fast gentle fist style into a more agile and flexible one. Plus, her crush on Shinji only motivated her more than it distracted her. Oh, it was so obvious the girl was infatuated with the young genius it baffled Asuma to no end that the usually perceptive and sharp Shinji appeared to be completely oblivious to the Hyuga's rather conspicuous display of affection. Not that he would ever deign to get in the middle of the whole thing by telling the boy. He wasn't a meddlesome person by nature, and it would be too troublesome to do in the first place. Not to mention the team dynamics might be affected if the relationship between the two got awkward. All in all, if Asuma was being truly objective, then yes, he would conclude that his team was ready for a C-ranked mission. They are ready, Asuma answered with conviction. The older Sarutabi leaned back, troubled that his son was convinced of his team's readiness. That, to him, was a sign that the man was not ready to be a Jounin squad leader. He only asked his son if he thought his team was ready as a test. No genin team was ready to undertake a potentially dangerous mission only a month from graduation, no matter how gifted they were. It was not just a matter of combat readiness. For genins who were to embark on their first mission outside the village, it rested solely on how prepared they were to face the realities of being a shinobi. And something like that took time for the Jounin squad leader to slowly but surely mentally prepare and condition the young genins to be ready to potentially risk their lives for the village. Freshly graduated genins who got sent on missions they were not mentally prepared for was a recipe for disaster. At best they would come back learning a valuable lesson. At worst, they might freeze in the middle of a dangerous situation and lose their lives. Mostly, these unprepared genins would come back traumatized or scarred for life. With what was at stake, mental conditioning was not something that could be rushed. Hence, what else could he think but that Asuma was in over his head when his son claimed Team 10 to be ready for a C-ranked mission with just the slightest hesitance after barely a month of the required conditioning. But the duty of the father was not just to admonish, rather it was to let the son realize it on his own. Though such a philosophy when dealing with this wayward son of his often contradicted with the duty of a kid to discipline his soldiers, which only resulted in more conflict between the father and son. "Are you sure?" Hiruzen prompted, earning a look of dissatisfaction from the Jounin. Asuma furrowed his brows, slightly offended that his father was second-guessing his judgment. He could guess what his father was thinking, but he knew his team best. If he said they were ready, no one else was entitled to say otherwise. I am. The younger Sarutabi answered, his eyes narrowing in a challenge. Hiruzen sensed the oncoming conflict, and contrary to what his son thought, he never relished the bitter words they traded on a regular basis. But it was his duty, both as a father and his kid, to educate Asuma even at the expense of their relationship. You say they are ready, even though they have only recently graduated the Shinobi Academy. You leave me questioning your judgment, Asuma. I know my team best. They are not like other genins. All of them have the potential to be great, especially Shinji. Asuma shot back without hesitation, only to be cut off by his father. Do you know what the greatest cause of death for a shinobi in the field is? The Sundame spoke, slowly and softly without hurry. Only a man plagued with insecurity had to shout and scream to prove himself right. He who announced to the world that they were a king was no true king. One with true authority need not proclaim to the world that they had authority, for the world already knew. Asuma fought back the temptation to roll his eyes. Here it comes, the wise old man routine again, he thought to himself. I don't know, carelessness. Arrogance, he answered flippantly. No. Carelessness and arrogance is only a symptom of the true condition that kills the shinobi. The true reason is assuming one is special. That they weren't like all the other shinobi out there, that they were the protagonist of their story. Thus they needn't be cautious because of just how special they thought they were. The Sundame hardened his gaze as he continued, and then they die, their last thought being the realization that they weren't special after all. The same goes for a leader who, believing that their subordinates are special, overestimates them and as a result leads them to their death. Tell me, Asuma, do you think your team is special? Asuma gritted his teeth. I know what you're trying to say, that I have overestimated my team and am making a mistake overestimating them and sending them into danger. However, have you considered that maybe, just maybe, sometimes you don't know everything? Perhaps, I, who spent the last month with this team, could possibly know more about them than you. You sit there in your ivory tower looking down on the rest of us, pitying our ignorance, while wielding the wisdom of the elders like a club. But don't pretend like you have been the greatest teacher in history when your own disciples have been scattered in the winds. I am different from you. Spare me the lecture, old man. The Hokage inhaled sharply, before removing the Kige's hat atop his head and setting it down next to him on the table. What you call an elder's wisdom is just the accumulated lessons we have learned after a lifetime of failure. You see this hat? It is a heavy object. The weight I feel, the worry that I can never quite pinpoint that never goes away. That is the burden of responsibility. It is both a blessing and a curse that I have learned to live with since the first day I started wearing this hat. It is a constant reminder that I am now responsible for every single soul within Konoha. You who have never once shouldered the burden of responsibility can never understand what it is like in my shoes, yet you dismiss my words as hypocrisy. I had assumed that your immaturity would change after you became a Jounin sensei. Alas, I have been proven wrong. You have yet to understand that as a Jounin squad leader, you are no longer only responsible for yourself, you are also responsible for the 3 genin on your team. Asuma took an indignant step forward, his chakra flaring in his anger and frustration, though the pressure was easily repelled by the old man's own aura. The hidden Anbu bodyguards in the corner of the room looked at each other, unsure whether or not to intervene. They knew Asuma was the Hokage's son, so they could evaluate that the man was not truly a threat. Furthermore, they already felt like outsiders listening in on what should be a private family affair. You don't know anything about me. You never did and you have never tried to. All you do is sit there judging me and looking at me with disappointment in your eyes like I am not worth even 1 second of your time. Be honest, this was never about my team. You just don't trust me nor my judgment. The Sundame sighed, already tiring of this argument. It was always the same damn thing over and over again with his son. Miscommunication was the greatest impediment to any restoration of a healthy relationship between the father and son, this Hiruzen knew to be true. But knowing didn't mean anything when every time the two spoke, tempers would flare and pride took precedence over a peaceful resolution. Enough. One word quietly spoken, and a flare of his own chakra, akin to the hand of God brushing away a hurricane, was all the Hokage needed to extinguish the rising tension and remove the pressure from Asuma's chakra flare. If you believe so strongly that you are right, then nothing else I say can change your mind. Take the mission. You are dismissed. The Jounin stood there, the anger and frustration still bubbling and threatening to spill over the edge. Even if his father had relented, he still felt like he was 10 years old again, being chastised by his disappointed father after throwing a temper tantrum. He stalked forwards and grabbed the mission scroll. It was never about being right. Asuma muttered under his breath as he turned to walk away. The Sundame's breath hitched in his throat as he watched his only living son exit the room. What would it take for reconciliation, he wondered, his death? Might the metaphorical hatchet have to be buried with him for his son to make peace with his failed parenting? I apologize for that embarrassing scene you two had to witness. He offered to the seemingly empty room. We apologize for intruding, Hokage-sama. The Anbu bodyguard responded awkwardly. Hiruzen pinched the bridge of his nose with his eyes closed, trying to soothe the encroaching headache. Baiwako would have known how to reconcile us. Team 10 was gathered by Asuma not long after he had given us day off. We had been walking around trying to decide where to go for dinner before Asuma suddenly showed up in front of us. He seemed agitated, even if his face didn't look that way. He had on a fake smile, one that looked like the casual, laid-back expression he usually had on. But it was different. Good news, we just got a C-ranked mission. He cheerily announced, but the joy in his voice sounded hollow. Although it didn't seem like Shino nor Hinata perceived it as they reacted naturally without question. So soon? Shino asked, an eyebrow cocked. Asuma nodded, yep. I will fill you in on the details tomorrow morning, but for tonight pack the essentials and get ready for a 2-week mission. We will be meeting at the village gate at first thing in the morning, so make sure to get enough rest tonight. Should we be expecting any trouble? I asked, though my voice was hinting at what I assumed was being left unsaid, judging by Asuma's strange behavior. The man turned to me and replied, nothing out of the ordinary. I shrugged, maybe his weirdness didn't have anything to do with the mission. Where are we headed, Asuma-sensei? Hinata inquired. To the capital. The next morning Team 10 assembled at the village gates. Us 3 genin arrived at pretty much the same time while Asuma was already there waiting for us with a cigarette in his mouth, a tad bit too early for that, don't you think, sensei? Hinata and Shino carried backpacks with everything they needed for a 2-week mission, and so did I. I could have stored everything I brought in my inventory, but it would have been way too transparently bizarre since I had no storage scrolls on me. Ah yes, Fuinjutsu, The technique of sealing objects, beings or chakra within another object, was undoubtedly a very useful skill. It was also a subject that I had tried learning when I was in the academy. The problem was that fuinjutsu was fucking difficult. At least, it was for me. The first scroll I read on the subject was titled The Fundamentals of Fuinjutsu. Turns out, the fundamentals of a subject as esoteric as fuinjutsu was still way too complicated for a person with next to no knowledge on the topic. It was as though I was reading something written in another language. Jargon like matrices and arrays were being thrown around by the author of the text as if they expected a complete beginner to understand what was written even without a glossary of terms. Imagine reading a textbook on advanced quantum mechanics when you were still learning that 1 + 1 = 2. That was how I felt leafing through the fuinjutsu textbook. Worst thing was, I didn't even receive any int stat gains because I couldn't absorb the information in the scroll. I knew that I wasn't exactly the smartest guy around, but I had assumed with an int stat as high as I had, I could at least be somewhat proficient in fuinjutsu. I was wrong. If I had to justify my complete and utter lack of talent in the sealing arts, it would be that some people had a natural gift for seals while others just couldn't comprehend a single iota of the technique. Sure, it sounded simple enough on paper, but once you got into the nitty-gritty details, the science and mathematical equations behind it, then none of it made sense. Even something as simple as storage seals was mystifyingly complicated. Space folding and pocket dimensions were the basics of fuinjutsu. How the fuck was anyone, let alone a 12-year-old, supposed to be well versed in such incomprehensible concepts? My miserable lack of talent in the subject could possibly be attributed to my comprehension and familiarization of conventional physics. Basic conservation of mass and energy, and three-dimensional space was what I was used to. But fuinjutsu required you to throw every preconceived notion of how the world was supposed to work out the window and start to lay a new foundation of universal ideas. It was no wonder people like Naruto and Jiraiya excelled in the art, since it required a unique perspective and understanding of the world that did not conform to traditional conventions in order for one to acquire an expertise in the subject. One would require a real flair for the study of runes and seals to become proficient. Others like the Sundame probably brute forced their way through pure memorization into learning fuinjutsu. My int was as of yet not high enough to do something similar. Runic script looked like squiggly lines to me that appeared more like a madman's incoherent doodles rather than an established language writing system that it was supposed to be. I could only hope that in the future, when my int, and by extension my cognitive abilities, were high enough that I could begin similarly brute forcing my way into learning fuinjutsu. For now, however, I would have to rely on a good old rucksack to carry my belongings. Silver lining, being encumbered from my backpack constituted as physical training, so I could probably get stats from that too. G morning sensei. Hinata blearily greeted while stifling a yawn and rubbing the sleep from a corner of her eye. It seemed that she was perhaps too excited last night and as a result she couldn't get enough sleep or something. Cute. Asuma waved us over before taking one last puff from his cigarette, littering it on the ground and extinguishing the butt with the sole of his sandal. Morning, he replied, good that you're all early. The client isn't here yet, so I'll take this time to brief you on the mission details before he arrives. We have been tasked with escorting the client, Kurokawa Yoshio, to the Land of Fire's capital city. The mission duration will be at most 2 weeks if nothing unexpected occurs, though I do not expect anything out of the ordinary either. Now I must warn you, there was considerable resistance for a genin team as green as you three to take a C-ranked mission only a month after graduation. The usual standard is at least 2 to 3 months of D-rank missions before a team is even qualified to receive any higher rank missions. But, fortunately for you, our employer is an old friend of mine who specifically requested for me, and by extension, you. And I reported that I believed the three of you are ready to take this mission. Asuma narrowed his eye in a rare display of authority and adamas. Do not prove me wrong. Is that understood? Hi sensei. The seriousness in his voice woke us up from our drowsiness and we refocused ourselves. He continued, satisfied with our response, I expect the three of you to be on your best behavior. Remember, mission completion is only one aspect of our job. Professionalism brings back return customers. Treat the client with respect and be polite. We are professional shinobi, so the least we can do is be courteous to the man paying our wages. Nobody in the village will openly say this out loud, but Konoha and the service it provides is ultimately a business. Meaning profit making is largely why we exist. Of course we do not participate nor tolerate the more heinous requests like human trafficking or narcotics distribution, nor requests that would be against the interest of our village and the land of fire. However, there is more at stake than just a mission reward whenever we accept a request. Konoha's reputation is on the line here too. The reason why we are so prosperous and widely recognized as the strongest hidden village is not just a matter of military might, though that definitely plays a significant role too. Rather, it is our reputation as a trustworthy, responsible and competent hidden village that attracts business from those that can afford our services. I blinked, not really expecting an impromptu lecture from Asuma first thing in the morning, but listened attentively regardless. I was sure that the man was also anxious that he put his own reputation on the line when he recommended us to take on a C-rank mission so soon after graduation. A Jounin had to take into account so many different factors during a mission, even if it was just a C rank, and that was not to mention bringing 3 green genin along as well. So I could hardly fault him for being strict. Without going too deeply into the economics of the village, C-ranked missions are not as profitable as one would imagine, especially not if an elite Jounin like myself is participating in it. Now, I'm not bragging here, it is a simple matter of opportunity costs. The time I spent on a simple escort mission could be used for a more lucrative assignment that would bring in more than 10 times the income. But to get those high-paying jobs, we have to do less rewarding work that improves our market share in the shinobi industry. Thus, C-ranked missions are generally more for the purpose of building a reputation, attracting new clients and training novice shinobi like you. That is not to say that they aren't important, because they still bring in a substantial income for the village, though not nearly as much as A or even B-ranked missions. Now, before we head out of the village, the very first time for some of you I'm sure, there are some things I need you to understand. Asuma's voice took on a more grave tone. Things outside the safe and secure walls of our village are not nearly as idyllic as the life you have experienced in Konoha. I don't think the three of you needs me to reinforce just how dangerous being complacent is. Just because you're shinobi who knows how to use chakra doesn't mean that you are invincible. Just remember that you're not that special outside of these walls. There are plenty of enemy operatives out there who have very real grudges against our village over past conflict, and being careless can only lead you to an early grave. The three of us exchanged looks, flummoxed at our sensei's sudden solemnity. It was strangely bizarre seeing the man who was usually a laid-back, carefree individual adopt such a stern demeanor. I could kind of understand where he was coming from though. We were his treasured disciples, and even if a simple C-rank mission promised little excitement, the old adage that is Murphy's Law dictated that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. As Asuma continued his lecture, elaborating on what he was expecting from us mission-wise, a horse-drawn carriage approached us. The carriage itself was a modest, open-air vehicle that was being pulled by a single horse. 2 men were on the carriage, one, the driver, a nondescript coachman presumably of civilian origin, and the other was the passenger, a man roughly the same age as Asuma, dressed in luxurious-looking robes and whose fingers were decorated with simple but expensive-looking rings. He, the client I presumed, wore clothes that looked like the man was trying to impress, rather than for any purposes of comfort or practicality. The carriage stopped near us, and the passenger alighted before throwing his arms out while approaching our team. Asuma. How have you been, my friend? The Jounin returned a smile and embraced the man for a moment before coming apart. Worse now that you're here. The client feigned a hurt expression, and after I went through the trouble of dismissing the mercenaries I had hired so that I could hire you instead. You wound me, Asuma. Yeah, cry me a river. You got an elite Jounin for the price of a C-rank mission. You're a merchant through and through. The Jounin shot back teasingly. The man chuckled, hey, penny pinching is the foundation of any successful businessman. Internally I scoffed at their exchange. So much for maintaining professionalism and staying courteous to the client. And as they spoke, I received a system notification. It was a quest alert. Odd that it took this long to be generated, since they were usually created the moment our sensei accepted a mission for us. Quest alert. To the capital. Successfully escort Kurokawa Yoshio to the capital. Ensure no harm comes to Yoshio before he arrives at the capital. Rewards happy smiley. Plus 20,000 EXP. Failure happy smiley. Rep significantly decreased with Saru to be Asuma. C-rank missions locked for 3 months. Accept. Y/N. Right off the bat, the EXP reward for the quest was just spectacular. It would guarantee at least 1 or more level ups instantly upon mission completion, and that was excluding any bonus rewards from the hidden objectives. However, that was also admittedly concerning. Because unless such a high quest reward was the average for C-rank missions, it might possibly mean that something was up with the mission. This was my first C-rank mission, so I couldn't tell, but either way I wasn't about to let down my guard for the duration of the mission. The two continued exchanging barbs before sharing a laugh as Asuma gestured towards us. Come Yoshio, meet my team. They may look tiny, but trust me, they're definitely one of the best genin teams in the village. The man turned to us, and if I had to use one word to describe the man, it would be handsome. He had clear, sharp eyes and striking features. Yoshio didn't fit the mainstream appeal of what was considered attractive, but he definitely possessed a certain gene size quos that enhanced his appeal. If I could see the man's stats, it would probably read that his char was around 100 or something. Nice to meet you all. My name is Kurokawa Yoshio, and I'm sure I will be tremendously satisfied with your performance. Please take care of me. Pardon my previous rudeness, I was overcome with nostalgia upon meeting your sensei. He has saved my life once or twice, you know. Pfft, try 3 times. The snide comment from Asuma was ignored by the client. We bowed in return and I spoke for the team. There is no need, Kurokawa Dono. My name is Shinji Ikrai, on my left is Hyuga Hinata and my right is Abaram Shino. We are at your service. Yoshio laughed, oh my, how polite. You have taught them well, Asuma. And please, there's no need for formalities, you can just call me by my name. Asuma stepped in with a hand on the merchant's shoulder. All right, enough pleasantries. We should get going, daylight's burning. With that, we suspended our conversation and Yoshio took his seat on the carriage while the rest of us positioned ourselves around the carriage in a diamond formation. Asuma took the position of vanguard such that he would be the first to respond to any threat we would meet on the road, while Hinata and Shino, our tracking and capture specialists, took the position of left and right flank. Their respective abilities allowed them to perform the role of both reconnaissance and guard duty at the same time. As for me, I shored up the rear guard as the quote-unquote long-ranged specialist, though I would argue that I was much more proficient in a taijutsu exchange than throwing around ninjutsu. It was in this formation that Team 10 escorted our client, Kurokawa Yoshio, out the village gates and onwards to the capital in our very first C-rank mission. It has been some time since we left the village. The road to the Land of Fire's capital city from Konoha was littered with small villages and other supply outposts. It was a road with moderately heavy traffic taken by travelers, merchants and craftsmen. There was even a large town at the halfway mark between Konoha and the capital where we encountered quite a few other Konoha shinobi either on the way back to the village or stationed there permanently. Coincidentally, I even found a shop there selling weapons and other tools with a signboard that wrote Kotetsu no Ryua. Naturally, I did not enter the shop no matter how curious I was. The mission was initially estimated to take at most 2 weeks, taking into account a week's travel from Konoha to the capital at the pace of a civilian walking on foot. However, since our client had procured a horse-drawn carriage for himself, we could travel at a much faster pace than we would have walking. It was our 3rd day on the road and at our current pace we would reach the capital city the next evening. We haven't really needed to camp out in the woods at all ever since we left Konoha, since there were the occasional inns that we could rest in, which suited the client's preference just fine. He was a merchant who was used to a certain standard of comfort and civilization, so camping out in the woods was a last resort for the man. The journey was largely uneventful without encountering any surprises on the road. We were traveling on the main highway between a hidden village and the capital city of one of the 5 largest and most powerful nations on the continent. No bandits or marauders would be foolish enough to throw their lives away trying to rob travelers on a road that was regularly patrolled by Konoha shinobi or the daimyo's own soldiers. Punitive expeditions consisting of the daimyo's troops were also occasionally sent out to clear the surrounding land of bandits and thieves, so crimes were few and far between. Generally, even civilians could make their way between Konoha and the capital city unmolested by any of the more criminal persuasion. We were only hired as by Yoshio as a precautionary measure. After all, it was better to have shinobi bodyguards and not need them, rather than having to need us not having hired us. Even then, it wasn't cost efficient to be hiring professional shinobi to serve as bodyguards to travel on this road. Mercenary fighters, who were just a step up above hired thugs, were more than sufficient. But Asuma had been requested by the client for old-time sake, as he had put it. So we were lucky, in a sense. Yoshio had elaborated that he originally hired mercenary escorts but dismissed them after hearing that Asuma was in Konoha training a genin team. So he released the mercenaries from their contract, even at the expense of having to pay the full amount for a job only half done, to hire Asuma and us instead. Regardless, we performed our duties at a standard that was expected of professional shinobi belonging to the greatest of the hidden villages. Shino constantly sent out several Kikaichua to perform reconnaissance while Hinata activated her Bakugan every so often to scan our surroundings just in case. Though I lacked the monitoring abilities of the Hyuga and Aburam, I had superhuman senses owing to my perk, heightened senses, so I could still keep an eye and ear out for any potential trouble even if it weren't at the level of my teammates. Asuma was content with just leading the way and acting as a major deterrent to any would-be troublemakers. The forehead protector engraved with Konoha's symbol coupled with the dark green Jounin vest signaled to other travelers that he was an individual to be reckoned with. Even the most clueless civilians would be able to recognize a monster in human form just from the way Asuma carried himself and the outward pressure of a crouching tiger he exuded. Currently, we were on our way to an inn that would be our last accommodations before we arrived at the capital city. Throughout the journey, since there was barely anything happening, the genin passed the time by talking to Yoshio. He was a worldly merchant who had traveled across the lands, and thus had plenty of stories and experiences he could share with us. Yoshio explained that he went to Konoha to meet a trading partner from the Land of Wind, in order to finalize a trading agreement. With the meeting a success and a contract signed, he was now heading back to the capital to start working. The merchant then shared that he was originally from the Land of Noodles, south of the Land of Wind. He made his first bucket of gold exporting seafood to the landlocked Land of Wind before making his way to the Land of Fire, the most prosperous of the elemental nations. Yoshio subsequently set up a business in the Land of Fire's capital city with the goal of seeking further riches and success. However, he found himself being only one of many merchants and traders who arrived at the Land of Fire's capital with the same ambitions. Initially, he encountered difficulty trying to establish himself in a market already saturated with people like him. However, he was able to rely on his good looks and charm to attract the attention of a widowed Kizaku baroness in the capital and subsequently received her patronage. With the backing of a Kizaku noble and her financial support, he was able to set up a firm foundation in the Land of Fire's markets and achieve further success trading goods to and from other nations. I was surprised to find Yoshio proudly sharing the sacrifices he had to make in order to achieve his current success as a merchant. He wasn't ashamed that he basically had to perform the duties of a gigolo for an older woman and in return receive financial support. The man had added that many others were envious of his position, and would kill to take his place, thus he was not at all ashamed of his actions. In fact, he took some pride in his appearance and charm that was found attractive by one of the wealthy Kizaku. Although, I was initially confused by the term he had used, Kizaku, and so I asked him to elaborate. Yoshio explained that Kizaku was a catch-all term used to refer to the nobility. There were several categories organized under the court nobility, in order of hierarchy: Koshaku, the dukes and duchesses; Hakushaku, the counts, countesses and earls; Shishaku, viscounts; and Donshaku, the barons. These were 4 of the 5 aristocratic titles conferred onto or inherited by the nobles. The last of the nobility were the princes and princesses, who was instead categorized under the royal Kazaku. They were separately organized as these were titles that were limited to the royal family and stood at the top of the political food chain in the daimyo's court. I was immensely intrigued by the explanation, since I had never really given much thought to the system of power in the nations, only focusing on my own personal growth and strength. The world outside of Konoha was much more complicated than I had once thought. Ultimately, however, such matters were not relevant, nor would it affect me in the near future, so I quickly pushed the thought to the back of my mind. It was an interesting explanation, but as a shinobi I was pretty much almost entirely divorced from the court intrigue and schemes for power. It was nearly sundown when we arrived at our destination for the day, a large but modest comfortable inn located a day's travel from the capital city. It was packed with other travelers making their way either to or from the capital, but the innkeeper already knew that it was a popular resting spot for weary travelers, so the inn was expanded to be able to house more than 100 guests concurrently. After hitching the horse and carriage, we got 3 rooms. One would be taken by Yoshio alone, the other shared by Asuma and the driver, while the last would be shared between the 3 genin. This was the usual arrangement whenever we stayed overnight at an inn. Since Yoshio was expected to pay for all of our travel expenses, which naturally included accommodations and meals, paying for 3 rooms was the most the penny-pinching merchant would tolerate. Even if he had a good relationship with Asuma, profit-making was still at the forefront of the merchant's mind. He had plainly stated that paying for 3 rooms was already out of consideration for his old friend. As professionals, we could hardly complain since it was already a great deal better than having to sleep out in the open. Truth be told, many clients would have refused to pay for more than they had to and would have insisted the shinobi bodyguards to stay outside his window or something for protection. The first night, Hinata had sputtered and stammered incoherently upon learning that she had to share a room with 2 boys. But she quickly calmed down and accepted the situation pretty easily, albeit still blushing crimson red. Yoshio had taken one look and laughed, commenting that it was great to be young. I agreed. If Hinata was older, I might have some resistance sharing a room with her too. After we brought Yoshio's luggage to his room, we went down to get dinner. The inn was not just a place to stay, it also functioned as a restaurant and tavern for travelers. There were roughly 24 other travelers who were having their own meals as well. We even spotted a team of Tsunagaki or shinobi who looked to be escorting their own client. Asuma exchanged a cordial nod with them before warning us to refrain from approaching any foreign shinobi when out on a mission, even if they were allies. One could never know if we had conflicting mission objectives that would cause either party to disregard that alliance. I wondered to myself if these Suna shinobi knew of the upcoming plan to invade Konoha during the Chuunin exams. Probably not. They were too far down the chain of command to be privy to such sensitive information. We sat down to take our meal, a humble offering consisting of just plain rice and some side dishes. Contrary to his appearance, Yoshio did not have extravagant tastes when it came to the food he ate. To him, food taken in private, that is, not in the company of other distinguished figures, was purely for the sake of nutritional sustenance. His clothes, while ostentatious, was worn entirely for the sake of keeping up appearances. It seemed to me that the merchant was not a stranger to hardship nor the inconveniences of poverty. As Yoshio lifted up a cup of tea to take a sip, Asuma's eyes suddenly sharpened and without warning his hand flashed forward with the chopsticks he was holding. The ends of the chopstick stopped an inch above the cup of tea Yoshio was about to drink from. We were all taken aback by the sudden action of the jounin before I caught sight of a bead of silvery liquid accurately caught by Asuma's chopsticks. I looked at the space above the teacup to find a thin thread leading up to the ceiling and through a tiny hole made in the wooden boards that was the floor of the second story. I then realized that the drop of liquid must have flowed down the thread silently and nondescriptly. If not for Asuma's perceptiveness and quick actions, the liquid, presumably poison or something similarly nefarious, would have entered the teacup and be drunk by Yoshio with no one the wiser. The atmosphere at the dinner table suddenly turned tense as Asuma eyed the hole from which the thread had emerged. "Hinata," he quietly instructed while motioning for Shino and me to assume defensive formations around the client. Yoshio was confused beyond measure and was about to ask what was going on before Asuma gestured for him to stay silent and keep his head down. 2 men, dressed in black, exiting the eastern window. One of them is holding a small vial. Hinata promptly reported with her Bakugan active. Asuma turned to us, momentarily contemplating the next course of action, looking throughout the room at the rest of the occupants before his eyes landed on me. I am giving chase. Shinji, you're in charge. Escort Yoshio to his room and stay there until I return. Do not, for any purposes, leave the client alone. Not bothering to wait for a response, Asuma dashed out of the inn in pursuit of the assassins. Had I not been through multiple life and battles through dungeon boss fights, or had I not possessed gamer's mind, I might have been frozen with indecision at the sudden turn of events. But I was able to remain cool-headed enough to call out orders. Hinata, continue surveillance. Shino, defensive perimeter. Yoshio-san, please come with us. Quickly. I moved to lift the client from his seat, who still couldn't figure out what was happening. My eyes flickered to the Tsunagakyo Shinobi, the group I recognized to be the biggest threat in the room. But they appeared indifferent, seemingly not even having noticed what just happened. To make sure of their innocence, I casted Observe on the group, and saw nothing out of place. They were a group of 3 veteran genin and 2 chuunin, but none of them appeared a match for me. Seeing that there were no obvious immediate threats in our vicinity, Team 10 quickly escorted Yoshio up the stairs and to his room. Once the client was in his room, Shino posted a swarm of Kikaichu on all possible points of entry, namely the door and the window, while Hinata maintained concentration on scanning the surroundings with her Daojutsu. I remained next to the client, who I had crouching in one corner of the room. I focused my senses and tensed my body, ready to act at any moment. What in the world is going on? Yoshio demanded, slowly losing patience for our behavior. I thought that a merchant as experienced as he would have recognized the danger he was in, but I guess not. We think that there might have been an attempt at your life, Yoshio-san. Asuma-sensei has gone off in pursuit of the assassins. Don't worry, we will keep you safe. I answered quietly, my eyes never moving away from the window, which was the most likely point of attack for any would-be assailants. Assassins. Why would there be someone after my life? The merchant questioned, but it was not a question I had an answer to. I glanced at him, searching his face to see if he was acting. I suspected that this might be a situation similar to the Wave mission, wherein Tazuna had lied about the mission difficulty so that he had to pay less. Such a motive would track with the merchant's stingy personality. But I could not detect any deception in his expressions. Either Yoshio was a world-class actor, or he genuinely had no idea who or why someone would be seeking his death. I don't know. For now we will need you to remain calm while we figure things out. Asuma-sensei will soon be back, and hopefully he will have some answers for us. I replied, turning my gaze back to the window. At that moment, Hinata suddenly spoke up, 4 armed men approaching, dressed in black. 2 are going for the door and 2 scaling up the wall for the window. I furrowed my brows. Shinobi? I don't think so. They are scaling the walls with Shinobi Shuko, metal claws, but their chakra reserves are paltry. Okay. Hinata, Shino, you 2 take the ones coming up the window. I will handle the other 2. Understood. The 2 of them acknowledged before Hinata settled into the traditional gentle fist stance while a swarm of Kikaichua emerged from under Shino's clothes and flew out the window. Hinata. I readied myself in front of the door, my eyes closed but ears focused, listening intently for any movement in the corridor. A pair of muffled footsteps approached the room. I could distinguish the faint sound of their shoes wrapped in cloth to minimize unnecessary noise. The moment they reached the door, my eyes flashed open, and chakra surged through my arm and fingers. Forming a spear hand, I thrusted my arm through the door and directly into the chest cavity of the assailant, my fingers reinforced with chakra and Shinkyokan, puncturing and destroying his heart. A muffled scream from the victim did little to hide their demise. It was a near-instant death. I withdrew my arm and blasted the door off its hinges with a strong kick. I heard an exclamation in surprise coming from Yoshio behind me, but I ignored it. The door had flown forward, slamming my first victim against the wall before both the door and the assassin fell to the ground. I stepped out of the room, my eyes finding purchase on who was to be my second victim, looking wide-eyed at his fallen compatriot. Now that I had a good look at the assassins, I could see that they were dressed in black clothes and similarly masked with a black scarf. Honestly, they looked like the stereotypical version of what a ninja would actually look like in my previous life. An instinctual observe brought up his information for me. He was only level 17, with a max CP well below the average of any shinobi of the same level. A threat to an untrained merchant, but to me he was less threatening than one of the zombie minions I faced in the rank E dungeon. The assassin thrusted a dagger at me, but in my eyes his movement was so slow I didn't even need to utilize chakra enhancement to strengthen my physical capability. My arm flew forward, sliding against his extended arm. Though the assailant admirably attempted to fend me off, it was an exercise in futility since I moved faster than the man could even react and stuck out a thumb that pierced into his shoulder. My thumb, coated in chakra and strengthened from Shinkyokan, crushed one of his acupoints and disabled any further use of his right arm. With my other arm, I grabbed his one remaining good arm and twisted it behind him. I kicked the back of his legs and forced him to his knees before knocking him out with a solid chop to the back of his neck. After confirming that he was under the unconscious debuff in his status page, I returned to the room to see Yoshio still cowering at the corner of the room while Shino and Hinata had already neutralized the threats. One of them was unconscious on the ground while the other was on his knees, his arms above him in a show of surrender and a kunai poised at his throat courtesy of Shino. In just a span of 5 seconds, we had neutralized 4 assailants. It wasn't exactly the epitome of efficiency and competency, but for a team of Greenhorn Genin, it was pretty impressive. My teammates turned to me, glad to see that I was unharmed and dragging 2 unmoving bodies behind me into the room, though their eyes immediately moved to my blood-soaked hand. Shinji-kun. Your hand! Hinata exclaimed, moving towards me with worry. I released the 2 bodies which slumped to the ground before waving her off. I'm fine, it's not my blood. Oh, I'm glad. Right, of course Shinji-kun wouldn't have any trouble with these lowlifes. Her words had a more biting tone that I expected from the usually gentle girl, but I shrugged it off. Now that the fight was over, I had time to notice the system notifications that had appeared during the commotion. Plus 854 EXP. I had always assumed that only creatures from dungeons gave EXP, but I guess all beings would give EXP. Defeating enemies did nothing, I had to actually take their life for there to be EXP rewarded. Right. I killed a person. Oddly enough, however, I couldn't care much about it. I wasn't sure if it was gamer's mind suppressing a mental breakdown or if I was just desensitized from killing so many already in dungeons, but the act of killing didn't affect me much. I knew what needed to be done, and even if I disliked it, it was a life I had chosen. One didn't need to love killing, one just had to love the people they were killing for. The second and third system notification were slightly more surprising. Congratulations! You have killed your first human. You have received the title, Murderer. Murderer, plus 10% damage dealt to humans. I didn't really know what to feel about the title I received. On one hand, the effect of the title was pretty good. Since I was mostly going to fight other humans in this world, the 10% extra damage would apply to most of my enemies. But receiving the label of murderer when I had killed in self-defense was slightly unnerving. Through the effects of Lifesaver, you have earned plus 1 point. I had nearly forgotten that I had the Lifesaver perk that gave me a free stat point every time I saved a life. Turns out, within the safe walls of Konoha, there were hardly any opportunities to save a person's life. I didn't trigger its effects even once ever since I received the perk, but it seemed that the system had judged that I had saved Yoshio's life, thus it rewarded me with the free stat point. It was arguable that even without me being present, Hinata and Shino would have been more than enough to neutralize the threat to Yoshio's life. Unless, had I not been on this team, might another team have taken the mission instead, and without an elite jounin like Asuma present would they have missed the initial droplet of poison. So through the laws of causality was it a direct consequence of my existence that Yoshio's life was saved? Nope. I'm not going to dive headfirst into this rabbit hole. I saved a life, the system granted me a free stat point. That was all I need to know. As the saying goes, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Nothing would come of me over-analyzing how the system worked. If the system generously rewarded me with something, then I'll just gratefully accept the gift and say thank you. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the captured assailant move his hands slightly but stopped when he felt the sting of the kunai against his throat press deeper into his skin. Stop. Shino apathetically mentioned. I went forward and unmasked the man before widening my eyes at the sight of a capsule between his teeth. He smiled and bit down on the pill, its contents immediately flowing down his gullet. Too late, Shinobi. He choked out. I was slightly shocked at the complete lack of self-preservation instincts in the assassin. It reminded me of Danza's root agents, except it couldn't have been the old Warhawk. He wasn't the type to send well-trained but chakraless operatives to do a job his own Shinobi could. It'd be pointless. Smirking, my hand moved to his throat and green medical chakra flowed into his gullet. Did you think it was going to be that easy? What are you? The poison in the capsule was only just consumed, it had yet to reach his stomach to be dissolved and distributed to his bloodstream. That meant that I still could easily remove the toxins with medical ninjutsu. I traced my hand up his throat, to his jaw and pulled out the captured poison trapped in my medical ninjutsu chakra. It was the same silvery substance they had tried to lace Yoshio's tea with. Most likely a fast-acting, fatal poison designed to achieve a quick death through suicide. Because the alternative, as in interrogation and torture, was much more unbearable than a quick death. Upon seeing the futility of his suicide attempt, the assassin went crazy and tried dashing towards Yoshio, in a last-ditch effort to complete his mission. He didn't make it half a step before my hand reached out and gripped his face before slamming his head into the ground and knocking him unconscious. Shino, Hinata, check their bodies for any more of those suicide pills or other hidden weapons. As they rummaged through the clothing of the unconscious assailants, Asuma landed on the windowsill of the inn's room carrying 2 more of those assassins over his shoulder. He saw the results of our short battle and smiled with palpable pride, then turned to our client, Yoshio, we need to talk. After dealing with the inn owner and handing over some compensation for the broken door, we left the inn, which was now no longer a safe place to stay the night. Asuma made the call to travel through the night. Keeping us on the move would make us a more difficult target, he reasoned. However, not before we questioned the 5 remaining assassins, which brings us to now. One of the assassins woke up from a tight slap. I could see him blearily come back into consciousness as he adjusted to his surroundings. The man was currently tied to a tree, stripped to his underwear to ensure he had no access to any hidden equipment we did not find. Asuma gripped the front of the man's hair and slapped him again, leaving a nasty red palm print where the Jounin had hit him twice. He had requested for me to stay and watch while Hinata and Shino kept guard over the other prisoners, claiming that though it might be too soon for something like this for our first C-ranked mission, it would be better to get accustomed to the more unpleasant side of our business sooner rather than later. We had separated the prisoners and intended to interrogate them one at a time. Not only would it prevent them from sharing information, but we could also possibly play some mind games with the isolated assassins. "What is your name?" Asuma asked coldly. As the man regained his senses and realized he was nearly naked and bound, he understood what situation he was in. He stared indifferently at the Jounin but remained silent. There was no fear in his expression, as if he was unafraid of death. "Who sent you?" The Sarutobi repeated yet received dead silence once more. Asuma slammed a fist into the bound prisoner, sending him reeling and coughing from the impact. The Jounin had held himself back. The punch was heavy enough to cause pain but not enough to cause any internal injuries. "I will not ask again. Who sent you?" The prisoner looked up before spitting at my sensei. Asuma agilely leaned away from the projectile, and shook his head. "Wrong answer." Before he sent another fist careening into the jaw of the captive. Seeing that the gentle approach wasn't working, Asuma fished out a kunai and brandished it menacingly. "I know how to kill a man over 100 different ways with this thing. I know 1,000 more ways to make them hurt without them dying." He leaned in real close and stared coldly into the prisoner's eyes. "Last chance." The prisoner chuckled. "The sun shines eternal." Asuma froze and tilted his head in shock. What did you just say?" The tied-up assassin flinched and looked up at Asuma's face, almost as if only now taking in the appearance of his captor and realizing his identity. "You're one of the 12. The Jounin grabbed the assailant's throat and hissed out, "You said the sun shines eternal. What did you mean by that?" The prisoner's eyes flickered, scanning Asuma's facial expression, but I could sense a tinge of regret, like he knew he just messed up. He tightened his lips, determined not to say a single word more. Asuma thrusted the kunai an inch deep into the man's body, near his clavicle, which prompted a muffled scream of pain. From what I could see, the kunai was stabbed into one of the body's nerve clusters, stimulation of which would result in immense pain. "Talk," the Jounin demanded, digging the sharp end of the kunai around the wound. The prisoner suppressed the scream, the veins around his face and neck bulging crazily, but he refused to divulge any more information than he already had. Asuma ripped out the kunai in frustration before turning back to me. His eyes held a viciousness and edge that looked out of place from the usually kind expression he adopted. "Go back to the others, Shinji," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for debate. In his hand, the distinctive swirl of wind nature chakra circulated ominously. If a kunai was like a butcher's knife, then wind nature chakra in the hands of an expert was a scalpel. I could tell that he no longer wished for me to witness what he was about to do. "Understood." Asuma returned to our makeshift encampment shortly thereafter, his uniform stained with some drops of blood. He looked like he tried his best to clean himself up but with little success. Our other captives were still bound and unconscious, with Shinosuke Kaichua constantly monitoring them to ensure we were notified if they had awakened. Yoshio mostly kept to himself, still unnerved by the assassination attempt and mentally going through a checklist of people who might want him dead. Hinata stayed vigilant, her daojutsu occasionally being activated to survey our surroundings. I got up and approached the man, Asuma-sensei. What did you find out? He shook his head, nothing much. The bastard was stubborn. Looking in the direction he had come from, I asked, what about, did you? Asuma glanced at the rest of the team who had similarly shifted their attention to the Jounin before turning back to me. Loose ends have to be tied up, otherwise there might be consequences to your inaction. The hidden meaning in his words need not be explicitly spelled out. Seeing that he still took the time to impart a lesson even during a time like this, I could guess that he was used to being in such situations. Sensei, when he said, "The sun shines eternal," did you know what he was talking about? I probingly asked. Asuma adopted a look of deep thought. I can't be sure. For now, it's not something you need to be worried about. Just forget about it. I nodded in acknowledgement. If the man decided that it would be wiser not to share what he suspected, then as a genin and his direct subordinate, there was no way I could refute his decision. He walked up to one of the unconscious captives and hefted the motionless individual up on his shoulder. Time for round 2, I supposed. Before he began the entire process of questioning the assassins, Asuma had informed us of the protocols regarding battlefield interrogations. They were a necessary part of intelligence gathering, ugly, but necessary. Information warfare between two opposing sides consisted of the gathering of intelligence as well as preventing the other side from gaining any intel. Sometimes we would capture enemy combatants who held key pieces of intelligence, without which our own forces might suffer the consequences. Hence, enhanced interrogation methods were at times needed to pry the information out of captives unwilling to divulge the needed intelligence. There weren't really protocols, per se. Ultimately it came down to acquire the necessary information via whatever means necessary. If we had the time, methods aside from torture would have been preferred to ensure the intel received was accurate and reliable. For example, prolonged periods of isolation, starvation, dehydration and sleep deprivation were all extremely effective in breaking down the will of the prisoner. But we didn't have the luxury of time being on our side. Our client just had an attempted assassination, and those who wanted him dead might send another batch assassins as soon as they realized their first attempt failed. Lacking so much information meant that we were in the light while our enemies were in the dark, so we had to hurry. Making it to the capital city was one way of ensuring Yoshio's safety. No matter how brazen the assassins were, there was no way they would dare act in the capital since security in the city was second only to Konoha in the entirety of the Land of Fire, possibly even surpassing it. Technically, we didn't really need to question the assassins for their motives and who hired them. Team 10's mission was to safely escort Yoshio to the capital, and that was it. As long as we could ensure the client's safety up to the capital city's gates, our mission was accomplished. However, Asuma went the extra mile to investigate the true culprits behind Yoshio's attempted assassination as a gesture of friendship. It was an effort to ensure Yoshio's safety even after the mission was complete. That was also part of the professionalism Asuma had mentioned earlier, displaying the consideration and competence expected of professional, high-quality mercenaries like ourselves would almost always guarantee a return customer. Even if we couldn't get the answers we needed, as long as a sincere effort was made and a certain modicum of results achieved, the client would be satisfied with our performance. Personally, I was considerably astonished at how much went into the business side of our industry. I had always thought the demand for our services always trumped the supply, and thus Konoha could maintain a steady stream of income regardless of our performance. However, Tsunagakyo was a good example of poor management. Even if the Kazekage was an extremely powerful shinobi in his own right, it didn't matter if their village had a bad reputation that turned off potential clients. It put a whole different perspective on the Tsunaoto invasion of Konoha that was going to happen in half a year's time. The reason that had been offered for Tsuna's participation in the pre-planned invasion was due to a series of budget cuts by the daimyo of the Land of Wind, which resulted in an economic recession for the Tsuna. However, budget cuts weren't the root cause of their financial problems. After familiarizing myself with the business side of running a hidden village, I could guess that the fundamental reason for their budget cuts was the result of a poor reputation and lack of professionalism in their shinobi services. At least, when compared to Konoha, that is. One had to wonder why the Kazekage didn't just invade the Land of Wind's capital city and threaten the daimyo into giving them more money. The answer was easy enough to deduce. First off, that would just be straight-up extortion and robbery. Who would want to do business with a village that was criminal enough to rob even their own ruling daimyo? The subsequent drastic fall in reputation would only worsen their already bleak financial situation, and it would only be a short-term solution to a systemic problem. There were a multitude of reasons why the respective leaders of hidden villages didn't just take over the country, and reputation was just one of them. Though Asuma put in the extra time and effort to ensure Yoshio's safety out of consideration of their friendship, there was also an element of marketing Konoha's shinobi services as one that would go above and beyond what was required of us to guarantee customer satisfaction. That was what cements Konoha's reputation as the most prosperous and strongest hidden village on the continent. Konoha wasn't labeled the strongest because of any measurement of tangible strength, though the Yondame's display of overwhelming lethality during the Third Shinobi World War and the fact that we housed the Jinchu Yuriki of Kyuubi, the strongest Baijua, definitely helped. Rather, we were labeled the strongest because everyone else said so. The current Konohigakyo was far from the likes of Kumogakyo, objectively the strongest hidden village in this era in terms of military might. Just the fact that their Jinchu Yuriki could exercise complete control of the Hakai Bee meant that Killer Bee was the equivalent of a tactical weapon of mass destruction. Our current Jinchu Yuriki, Naruto, couldn't even come close to Killer Bee's full might, though his potential was certainly higher. But that was only the case in the future. Yet, Konoha was still publicly identified as the strongest because we had a stellar reputation acknowledged by the people who actively employed our services. It didn't matter if we had a Kage that was well past his prime, nor that of our three legendary Sannin, only one could still be considered as being a loyal and active agent of the village. All that mattered was public opinion, of which we had plenty in our favor. The interrogation of the other captives, according to Asuma, proceeded in a similar vein to the very first. They were suicide soldiers, trained to kill themselves before they would ever reveal even a single iota of information. The devotion and adherence to their cause was at the level of blind fanaticism, similar to Danza's root agents, though obviously in a different category. Some of them even tried immediately biting their tongues off the moment they woke up. Though Asuma had stopped them from taking their own lives, they still refused to talk even under the excruciating pain of torture. The Jounin ultimately had to silence them, permanently, in order to remove any possibility of our location being divulged to their employers. However, what little information we received also revealed more than what could be discerned on the surface. Suicide soldiers weren't mercenaries who would prioritize their own lives over profit or loyalty. Mercenaries were paid soldiers, meaning they would only fight or carry out tasks in return for remuneration. However, they would never risk their own lives since they could not spend the money if they were dead. Thus, suicide soldiers being sent after Yoshio revealed that the party that wanted his life was no ordinary organization. Though certain merchant guilds and aristocratic families raised their own death squads who were willing to die for their masters, these suicide soldiers were also treasured resources that were not flippantly utilized just to assassinate a mid-level merchant that was of little consequence in the highest level arena these organizations were active in. This told us that whoever sent those suicide soldiers after Yoshio was of a scale large enough to treat death squad soldiers as expendable consumables. That heavily narrowed down the pool of potential suspects. Furthermore, Asuma had also rationalized that given that these assassins were brazen enough to take action in the Land of Fire, not to mention so close to Konoha and the capital city, also implied that it was likely the enemy was an influence based in the Land of Fire. Yoshio, for the life of him, could not think of any individual or group that he would have offended enough to warrant suicide soldiers being sent to take his life. Or at least none that had sufficient clout and resources to do so. He claimed that he was always careful not to step on the toes of any giant merchant guilds when he did business and had no relation to any foreign organizations that would have wanted him dead. Even the most likely suspect, the trading partner from the Land of Wind he had met with in Konoha, was similarly only a mid-level merchant with limited influence and power. Furthermore, that man would absolutely have no reason to want him dead in the first place since their business dealings were a profitable venture for both parties. Thus, Yoshio was beyond perplexed. The knowledge that a powerful organization with the resources to send suicide soldiers after him to take his head was akin to a guillotine blade constantly hanging precariously over his neck, never knowing when it was going to fall. The poor man had been trembling non-stop during the last leg of our journey to the capital city. He repeatedly looked around, hoping, or rather dreading, to spot a hidden danger. Perhaps it was also the awareness that he now had to live as a paranoid man, always looking over his shoulder and sleeping with one eye open, that contributed to the tremendous anxiety undoubtedly growing within him. As for us, there were little we could do to assuage his paranoia. Shino was already consuming his Kikaichua at rate of thousands every hour to maintain a defensive perimeter around us, and it was also unreasonable to ask Hinata to keep her Byakugan active throughout the entire duration. Personally, I also lacked skills that could serve reconnaissance purposes if I excluded shadow clones, which would consume too much CP to be cost-effective. I could only maintain a heightened sense of vigilance, which amounted to not much more than paying more attention to my surroundings. Currently, we were just under an hour away from reaching the capital city of the Land of Fire, the end point of our mission and a bastion of safe refuge for Yoshio. As always, I was assigned to be the rearguard of our escort formation while Asuma led the way, the reasoning being that it was more likely for any enemies to be lying in ambush ahead of us since our destination was pretty obvious. Additionally, a shadow clone of Asuma now replaced the original driver of the carriage who we had left behind at the inn. Since we couldn't be sure of the driver's allegiances, it was wisest to leave no possibility for betrayal. The man was already paid in advance, so even if he were innocent, he could just consider his job ending earlier than expected, which would be a win-win. "How are you guys feeling?" The shadow clone, who kept one eye on the road and another on us, suddenly spoke up, dispelling the previously tense atmosphere. I could only assume that there was concern for our mental well-being, given that our C-rank mission took such a drastic turn. "We are uninjured, Asuma-sensei. Combat functions are unimpaired. My hive reproduction rate is unaffected, though my chakra reserves are at 50%. Shino concisely reported. That's not what I meant. I know that your first C-rank mission outside the village was probably not what you were expecting, so I want to know your mental state. The Asuma clone replied. Both Shino and Hinata fell silent for a moment, not really knowing how to articulate their feelings. They weren't like me, who had, gamer's mind, to regulate their emotions and psychological resilience. Though they were clan members who have trained all their lives to eventually become a shinobi, it was their first time fighting an actual enemy combatant, so it wasn't surprising they had mixed feelings about what just went down. Seeing the awkward silence, I took the initiative to answer, honestly, a little shell-shocked. I'm not a stranger to fighting, and I know it is just a normal part of our job. But it was still a little disturbing if I'm being honest. The Asuma clone glanced at me, more specifically my right hand, which had previously been thrust into the chest of an assassin, marking my first kill. That's perfectly normal, he reassured me, especially since you just killed for the first time. Right. Playing the part of a greenhorn genin who had just taken his first life, I looked downcasted, as though replaying the scene over and over in my head. Truth was, I moved past that whole incident pretty quickly. In my head, all I could see was an enemy who was a threat to myself and the mission. Eliminating an enemy, especially an assassin seemingly raised for the sole purpose of dying for his organization, held no particular emotional significance for me. I knew that the normal response to killing, at least in my previous life, would be a large scoop of post-traumatic stress disorder with an unhealthy sprinkle of nightmares, vivid flashbacks and severe anxiety. However, that just wasn't the case for me. I have had plenty of time after the killing to objectively rationalize the incident and go through a mental after-action report. The only fault I could find with my action was perhaps eliminating a potential source of information prematurely. Thus any guilt or remorse that should have been a healthy presence in my heart was simply absent. Furthermore, in this world where the life expectancy of even normal civilians was pretty damn short, the common sense in regard to killing and fighting, especially for shinobi, was drastically different to what I was used to. It was night and day as compared to the era of peace and abundance in my previous life, or at least in the country I lived in. In this world, every single person was familiar with the concept of an early and unnatural death, so taking a life was not nearly as impactful as it would be in my previous world. It is unhealthy to dwell on something that is a necessary component of our lives as shinobi. The first time is the hardest, it will become easier after this. Asuma advised. Withholding a "that's what she said" joke, I nodded mutely. You will eventually become desensitized to the act of taking a life. Which is fine, since it will only help you do your job better. As long as you never grow to enjoy killing, that is. There is a difference between those who kill to live, and those who live to kill. Make sure you never become the latter. The clone added. Hinata quietly asked, but sensei, aren't shinobi people who exist to kill? Not necessarily. At times we might be required to kill in order to accomplish our mission, but our existence does not revolve around the act. Remember, just because you have to kill doesn't mean you have to enjoy it. I understand. She replied. As we continued the conversation while at the same time remaining alert to our surroundings, the walls of the capital city slowly came into sight. Actually, the first part of the architecture that rose over the horizon was not its walls, but the tower of a massive castle in the distance. That, Asuma pointed out, playing the role of our tour guide, is the citadel of the Land of Fire. the one and only seat of power of our daimyo. That is where the daimyo resides, as well as the imperial family and their kin. It is also where I called my workplace for a good 8 years. I looked on in astonishment at the size of the castle. Even from a distance, I could tell that it absolutely dwarfed the Hokage's tower back in Konoha. Around me, however, Shino and Hinata didn't seem to look particularly surprised. "Have you guys been to the capital before?" I asked them. They nodded, Hinata turning back to me to elaborate. "Our clans regularly do business in the capital, and there are also some formal events we are occasionally invited to. That is also where I met Lady Shijimi for the first time, though I was still very young then." I sighed in amazement. I might have been a big hoe back on Earth, but here I was just a common genin who had little to no influence to speak of. People like Shino and Hinata were simply just higher on the social hierarchy as compared to some no-name orphan. Thinking back to when I used to rub shoulders with the most influential and powerful personages had me wondering what it would be like to do the same here. Not gonna lie, there was some part of me that still desired chasing after clout and influence at the highest level. Sure, individual martial prowess and violent might was good and all, but there was something about standing at the very pinnacle of society and wielding both economic and political authority that spoke to me on a deeper level. Authority taken with force and respect acquired via political machinations were two different experiences. One was akin to forcing yourself on a person while the other was a methodical and thorough seduction of a desired partner. Similar end results, but completely different methods and type of gratification. Before we enter the city proper, I must warn you of something. Asuma suddenly spoke up. Shino and Hinata might already be familiar with it, so this is more for your benefit, Shinji. I perked up, listening attentively to what sage advice Asuma was about to impart. In the capital city, the walls have eyes and ears. So it is very important to watch your words and behavior when we are inside. Since we are Konoha Shinobi, our every word and action are representative of our village. Saying or doing something stupid will only reflect badly on Konoha. So keep your manners and professionalism in mind. Here, you are no longer children but agents of Konoha. I had to withhold a laugh from his words. Honestly, I was raised in an environment where our public perceptions were of the utmost importance, so I was more than familiar with maintaining an immaculate public persona. And in a world where the internet was such a large part of our lives, with every tweet or post being heavily scrutinized by a global audience, being careful with every word and action was a necessity. Also, there are certain people who might have a negative impression of us just because we are Shinobi and from Konoha. Among them are powerful people we cannot afford to offend regardless of our identity. Ideally we wouldn't stay long in this den of vipers and lizards, but after what you've just been through, I think we could take a short vacation in the capital, wouldn't you agree? A vacation sounds perfect, Asuma-sensei. I responded enthusiastically. Little did I know that this little vacation would be a prelude to a storm in the land of fire. High up in the sky above the capital, a pigeon soared through the air before slowly descending towards a castle. As the bird approached the open window of a tower, it landed on the extended hand of a woman cloaked in the shadow. She removed a small slip of paper tied to the leg of the pigeon before unraveling the tiny scroll and reading its contents. The woman frowned, before the small slip of paper erupted into flames upon a surge of fire nature chakra being injected into the parchment, wiping any traces of the message out of existence. She quickly turned and left the room, stalking through the darkened corridor barely illuminated by paper lanterns. The soft glow of the fire cast light upon a small tattoo of a black sun behind her left ear. Entering a room at the end of the corridor, she fell to one knee. "My lord, Squad 112 has been wiped out." The figure sitting at a desk in the room looked up, his face shrouded by the darkness of the room. "What? How is that possible? Their target only had mercenary bodyguards, not even anywhere near the level of our agents," he exclaimed in astonishment. The woman continued, "Apparently the target hired Konoha Shinobi for escorts. They were the ones who prevented the assassination and killed Squad 112. We can assume that the target has already reached the capital city by now." The shadowy figure leaned forward, the bottom half of his face slowly coming into the light, revealing pale skin, a sharp chin and darkened lips curved into a frown. He stroked his chin with his hand, showing fingernails similarly darkened like his lips. "Why did Squad 112 engage despite knowing there were Shinobi?" he asked, a cold anger seeping out of his lips. The woman trembled. Our agents have been taught to complete the mission no matter what. I can only assume that." "Enough." He cut her off, causing the woman to flinch. "Why did he hire Shinobi? Could he have known we were after his life?" The man wondered aloud. "A coincidence, perhaps. Possible." The woman remained in her kneeling position, staying silent as her superior thought to himself. Finally, the man gestured towards the woman. "Regardless, the purpose has been achieved even if the assassination failed. It would still serve as a stern warning towards that woman. Send a message to her. She will know what to do." "Yes, my lord." As she stood up and gave a parting bow, the man raised his hand to stop her. "One more thing. Contact His Highness. Inform him that he can start exerting pressure on the lower court." As Team 10 approached the western gates of the capital, they slowly began to see more and more travelers on the road going to and from the city. Being that the capital was one of the busiest and wealthiest municipalities in the world, it wasn't a surprise for anyone that there would be all sorts of travelers on the road. They ranged from luxurious carriages surrounded by a platoon of bodyguards, Shinobi or otherwise, to farmers transporting their goods and produce to sell in the city. Of course, the distinctively wealthier of the travelers did not have to wait in line to enter the city like all the other commoners. They simply went straight up to the city guards, bypassing the cumbersome identity verification and questioning from the guards to enter the city directly without much fuss. Others had to wait in line and had to receive permission from the checkpoint authorities after undergoing verification and scrutiny before they could enter the city proper. Though the procedure was inconvenient, the line wasn't exactly slow-moving due to the large amount of guards posted at the gates, which helped speed up checkpoint verification and entry approval. Shinji mentally remarked that it was surprisingly efficient given the lack of modern conveniences like passport scanners or a computerized database for reference like he had in his previous world. Most of the city guards were wearing red uniforms, with the kanji for fire emblazoned on their right chest and an armband that signaled their occupation. A couple of them, however, were equipped with armor atop their uniforms. Presumably they were the squad leaders given how they were standing with authority at the back while their subordinates did all the work. Entry into the capital city was tightly controlled, and not just anyone could enter. Vagrants and the destitute were denied entry, as well as foreign agents without official permit like Shinobi from other villages were not allowed in as well. In the capital city where a majority of the nation's Kizaku and the one and only daimyo resided, it was no surprise they had such secure gates. Without much fuss, our entourage went through the identity verification process. For us Konoha Shinobi, The identification card assigned to us when we graduated the academy also served as our passports whenever we had to travel, at least officially anyways. Yoshio produced his own travel papers, even including a few Rio notes stuffed between sheets of paper as a tip, which the customs officer quietly accepted with saying anything. He whispered to us that though it wasn't necessary, greasing the wheels with small amounts ensured smooth entry into the city without being hassled. Furthermore, if he could build a good relationship with the city guards with such a small investment, then it would be money well spent, he reasoned. After being waved in and crossing the city threshold proper, our C-rank mission to escort Yoshio to the capital city was concluded. With the carriage parked to one side, Yoshio got off the carriage and looked like he could finally breathe properly after being in constant anxiety for the whole day. Finally in the capital. What a relief! Hinata chuckled at his antics before throwing a glance at me and quietening down. Did I look scary or something? Asuma took out the mission scroll and unfurled it. The mission has concluded. Signatures here and here to verify. Yoshio took the offered scroll and pen. Of course, of course. But before he penned down his signature, he paused to ask, but I'm still so confused, who would want to kill me? Asuma furrowed his brows. I can't be sure. I could try to find out for you, but that's a separate mission altogether, my friend. Come on, old friend, are you really going to leave me to die? The client tried to bargain. The Sarutobi shook his head. You know that's not how it works, Yoshio. You hired us for one mission, and that was to escort you to the capital. We've done that. Anything else, you have to apply for another mission request at the Konoha branch office. From what I could remember, the Konoha branch office Asuma was referring to is an office that accepted mission requests in the capital city, since it was unreasonable to demand Kizaku members to travel all the way to Konoha to employ our services. It also acted as an embassy of sorts that mediated any conflicts between Konohigakure and the daimyo's court. But something like that will be well in the range of a B-ranked mission. That's too expensive. I don't have that kind of liquid capital, not right now. Yoshio protested, waving his hands around animatedly. Asuma grudgingly sighed. Look, I can put in a word for you at the branch office, but I can't guarantee anything. But at least you'll be safe while in the capital. Security here is tight, especially with that guy over there watching over the city. He gestured at the castle, but I wasn't sure who he was referring to. Yoshio looked slightly comforted and sullenly signed the mission scroll, his signature as ostentatious as his fashion sense, confirming a successful mission completion and relinquishing us from our duties. The Jounin retrieved the mission scroll and shook Yoshio's offered hand. I wish you the best, Yoshio. Stay safe. The client, though unhappy that we didn't volunteer our services to help investigate his assassination attempt, was overall still satisfied with our performance. Not only did Asuma prevent him from dying via poison, even us genin played our part in thwarting further attacks. There was no avenue for him to complain about. Quest to the capital completed. Successfully escort Kurokawa Yoshio to the capital. Ensure no harm comes to Yoshio before he arrives at the capital. Square root. Defeat the assassins. 8/8. Yoshio 0 damage taken. Square root. Find out who sent the assassins. X. Rewards happy smiley. Plus 20,000 EXP. Hidden, new item, Assassin's Dagger. Hidden, new perk, Silver Tongue. Hidden, new skill, Indoctrination, X. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. Assassin's Deadly Dagger Grade, Rare. A blade crafted for the sole purpose of killing silently and stealthily. Durability, 130/130. Damage, C. DEX plus 30. Item skill, Sneak Attack, Passive. Damage dealt to an unsuspecting enemy when hidden upgrades damage grade from C to S. Silver Tongue, permanently increases char and rep gain by 25%. Putting aside the scary sounding skill that I missed out on, the new perk I received looked to be pretty interesting. Though char was still a stat which effects have yet to be deciphered by me, I would never say no to a perk that would enhance it by a percentage increase. That meant the effect of the perk would scale according to my growth in the future. As for the Assassin's Deadly Dagger, a damage upgrade from C to S was a massive increase. The mechanics of the gamer system when it came to doing damage was always rather vague. The quantifiable amount of damage dealt factored in numerous factors such as amount of strength put into the attack, the enemy's physical durability and of course the weapon's damage grade. As far as I could tell, the damage grade acted as a sort of force multiplier. I have yet to figure out the hard numbers behind each damage grade, but if I had to give a rough gauge it would look something like Damage E, 1.1x, Damage D, 1.2x, Damage C, 1.4x, Damage B, 1.8x, Damage A, 2.6x, Damage S, 3.2x. Hence, a weapon's damage grade jumping from C to S roughly meant more than doubling the force multiplier. Are you going back to Konoha now? Yoshio asked. Asuma turned back to our team, who upon hearing of a vacation a few minutes back was now looking at him with expectant eyes. Nah, we'll stay for a couple days. I want to show them around the capital and introduce them to some people I know. In that case, how about staying at my place? It's not the fanciest house but it would definitely be cheaper than renting a room in the city. Yoshio generously offered, though I could see from the glint in his eyes that he also wanted free Shinobi security services for as long as we stayed in the city. It was a fair trade-off in my opinion. Asuma rubbed the back of his head, we wouldn't want to impose. Nonsense, I won't take no for an answer. Yoshio insisted. It's the least I could do for the people who saved my life. Technically I saved your life 4 times now, Asuma corrected, to which Yoshio mirthfully rolled his eyes at, but all right, if that's the case we will have to accept then, won't we? As Asuma and Yoshio continued chatting, I took the opportunity to pull up my status screen. Name, Shinji Ikrai. Age, 12. Level, 28. Next level, 1350/20300. HP, 8580/8580. CP, 8800/8800. STR, 120, plus 5. VIT, 121, plus 7. DEX, 125, plus 13. INT, 132. CHAR, 27, plus 10, plus 25%, equals 43.60. Rio 288,623. Perks. Lesser chakra sensitivity. Lesser muscularity. Lesser agility. Lesser physicality. Heightened senses. Bull strength. Quicken thoughts. Poison resistance. Natural fire affinity. Natural wind affinity. Monstrous talent. Teamwork makes the dream work. Silver tongue. Titles. Lifesaver. Uchiha clan member. Konoha Genin. Rookie of the Year. Asuma's disciple. I withheld a whistle in appreciation at my accumulated stats. As a result of the month-long training period since I graduated from the academy under Asuma's tutelage, my stats and skills skyrocketed. Furthermore, quite a number of D-ranked missions turned quests provided points as hidden or bonus rewards as well, so I was able to save up quite a number of stat points as well. In addition to the 3 perks, heightened senses, bull strength, quickened thoughts, I received when my DEX, STR and INT reached 100 respectively. I had also acquired poison resistance when my VIT reached 100. Its effects were simple but effective resistance to the effects of most poisons. Since it was only resistance rather than immunity, I was still vulnerable to the toxicity of poisons and venoms. The only thing would be that my body could endure for a longer time before succumbing to its effects. I assumed that my next VIT perk would probably be poison immunity, or similar. That's it guys. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel, and also make sure you tell me your recommendation in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.